This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10. I'm old enough to remember when Sir Keir Starmer was abused for revealing that he and his family observed Shabbat on Friday evenings. And it was embellished and exaggerated to suggest that he would somehow be unable to respond to international emergencies during that period. And now he's effectively being painted as an emboldener. Well, not effectively. He is being painted as an emboldener of Hamas and crypto anti-Semite by Benjamin Netanyahu. What a strange course of events it is. If only somebody could have seen the moment coming when it would be widely accepted that even the vaguest, mildest criticism of Netanyahu's continuing slaughter of innocent Palestinians would render you a supporter of Hamas or an anti-Semite. How the world turns. I don't want to talk about that today. I want to talk about domestic politics. We've done a lot on Israel this week, actually a lot on Gaza this week, and we will do more because there's a U-turn on the way. I looked up the poll tax last night. I know what you're thinking. God, you lead an exciting life. Is that what it's like to be in showbiz? You look up the poll tax on a Thursday evening. You can hardly call this showbiz, but I was on Pointless Celebrities once. So I looked up the poll tax last night because I couldn't remember whether she'd actually done a U-turn or not. It's weird, isn't it, how things get baked into the national consciousness and how sometimes the way something is presented, or maybe not even sometimes, possibly always, the way something is presented is more important than what it actually contains. Who here does not remember the clip, the infamous, the famous moment, the iconic moment? In fact, we maybe should try and find it. I really should come up with stuff like this before we come on air at 10 o'clock in the morning. When Margaret Thatcher insisted, intoned even, that the U-turn... Actually, lads, you don't need the clip. I'll do it. U-turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. I think on reflection we should probably get the clip. And it became part of her legend, didn't it? Or part of her myth, part of her origin story. And it was widely praised. Now, I wrote a book once called... What was it called, Keith? How Not to Be Wrong, of which I think the very first line was, there's no point having a mind if you never change it. And there you could see those as the kind of two poles of opinion, couldn't you? There's no point having a mind if you never change it, at one extreme. And at the other extreme, U-turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. As in, I will never change my mind, regardless of how the situation changes, regardless of how the world turns, regardless of whether or not the facts have altered. I will not change my position. Oh, this is really it. This is more interesting than I realised last night when I looked up the poll tax to remind myself whether or not she had actually undertaken a U-turn. Because there's something quite fundamental here to the human condition, isn't there? People who are capable of changing their minds and people who aren't. But crucially, what's much more interesting than that relatively simple observation is the way that we turn refusing ever to change your mind, regardless of how much the evidence changes, into a virtue or a strength. Do you know what? I wasn't expecting to spot any parallels at all between these two stories, but that actually gives us a little sniff of Netanyahu, a little flavour of Benjamin Netanyahu, doesn't it? Turning an absolute refusal to allow anybody else to change their mind. You have been very supportive of Israel's adventures in Gaza, Keir Starmer, but now you're calling for them to stop, which means you must actually be a supporter of Hamas. You're not allowed ever, as the facts change, to change your mind. You turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning. Versus, there's no point having a mind if you never change it, which is a slightly simplified version, I think, of a political position outlined best by Edward de Bono shortly before he formed U2. I've done that joke now on this programme about 10, 11 times, and I don't think anyone has ever laughed. I get the occasional message saying Edward de Bono didn't found U2, James. Bono's real name is Paul Hewson. And I think there's someone else who didn't get the joke. It's a very poor pun on the rareness of the word Bono in public discourse. In fact, you can probably only think of two spaces in which the word Bono ever appears in public discourse. One is the frontman of U2 and one of the finest rock stars of not just his generation, but many others. And the other is an English philosopher and thinker called Edward. If you have to explain a joke, it's already failed, hasn't it? But anyway, I'm going to carry on. I'm just giving you a warning now. I'm going to carry on making that joke until someone laughs. So anyway, the philosopher Edward de Bono, shortly before he formed U2, observed that there's no point having a mind. Me laughing doesn't count. Or me laughing at you pulling stupid faces doesn't count either. Shortly before he formed U2, he observed in slightly more purple language, slightly more sophisticated language, he observed that there is no point having a mind if you never change it. Here she is. I should probably provide some sort of trigger warning for this, but I won't.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
So, ha. See, she knows how to get a laugh. There's someone I could learn from. Oh, and I did, you're right. I forgot about Pro Bono. So there's also Pro Bono, who is the little brother of Edward de Bono. Right, I've had enough now. This is getting ridiculous. You don't even know what the phone-in's going to be, I don't think. I think that's a pun there, isn't it? The lady's not for burning. Is that the original phrase? So it was a really clever rhetorical device, that. But it speaks to something much deeper. It speaks to making a virtue of obstinacy, making a virtue of stubbornness. And of course, it wasn't Margaret Thatcher who actually undertook a U-turn on the poll tax. She went into political oblivion, having been defenestrated by her own party as a consequence of the poll tax's unpopularity. And to simplify hugely, She refused all importuning to change course and ended up being chucked out by her own party. John Major. Have I ever told you the story of John Major's toothache? So it's an absolute masterclass of political shenanigans. But anyway, John Major became Prime Minister immediately after Margaret Thatcher, having been her Chancellor. And what was the first thing he did, boys and girls? He U-turned on the poll tax. So even when the writing is on the wall and your sandwiches are being carefully wrapped in a roadmap by the Parliament, by your own members of Parliament, even then the lady's not for turning, even as she faces political defenestration, an ignominious end to a lengthy career, the culmination of her premiership being, as it is for almost all politicians, failure, even as she's looking down the barrel of that particular metaphorical gun, she still won't change her mind. She still won't undertake a U-turn. But somewhere between those two positions, there's no point having a mind if you never change it, and U-turn if you want to, or the lady's not for turning. Somewhere between those two positions, we find the flippity-gibbet. We find the flip-flopper. We find the inconsistent player who really changes his mind according to the last person that he or she spoke to. The weather vane, if you will. The person who will be blown in the wind. And that, in many ways, is going to be as bad as the person who is the correct word obdurate. I like the word. I like the sound of the word obdurate. Someone look it up. Tell me what it means, please. Don't worry. Someone listening will do it. You're far too busy. I like the sound of obdurate. Sounds about right. So almost as bad, or perhaps equally as bad as someone who is obdurate, is someone who is, what's a posh sounding word for flip-flopping that would sit comfortably along obdurate? What? Unobdurate. Thank you, Keith. Yes, almost as bad as someone who is obdurate is someone who is violently unobdurate. Someone whose opinion changes with the wind, who will be blowing this way on a Monday and that way on a Tuesday. They said this about Boris Johnson, didn't they? And I've got a story about him coming up a little bit later. And they also, of course, said it about Donald Trump. It all depends on who the last person that he spoke to is. So that can be just as bad. Johnson's an odd example because in some things he's obdurate, and in other things he's obnoxious, and in other, well, everything he's obnoxious, and in other things he is blowing in the wind. So I think possibly Natasha was better tuned than I was to this on Wednesday as we listened to PMQs, because sometimes the real meat of the moment lies between the lines that are actually said out loud. Vacillating. Well played, Lee. Lee goes, I'm not having it unobdurate. That was a ridiculous suggestion from Keith. So being a bit vacillating can be as bad as obduracy. Or vacillation. Oh, hello. Roger's thesaurus. Vacillation can be as bad as obduracy. But it became clear on Wednesday, and between you and me, I did need Natasha to point it out to me. It became clear on Wednesday that between the lines of what Keir Starmer was actually saying out loud, it became clear that they were going to undertake some fairly hefty changes to the cuts to the winter fuel allowance, the cuts to every pensioner's winter fuel allowance, whether they are as rich as Croesus or as poor as a church mouse. They were all, well, no, that's not quite true. Forgive me. Not quite as poor as a church mouse. Apart from people who were as poor as the proverbial church mouse, everybody was set to lose it. And in tacking it to an imminent fiscal event, an autumn statement, whatever it may be, he made it absolutely clear that they were going to change it. They were going to do something. And we don't know yet what, but we do know it will be widely described. In fact, listen to the Margaret Thatcher line again and listen to what she says about the media, because this is a really crucial point of the position that Keir Starmer is in right now.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
And Sonny Bono, of course. I forgot about Sonny Bono. My apologies. I got you, babe. I think that's the perfect illustration, isn't it, of what Keir Starmer finds himself facing now. Because Margaret Thatcher rightly points out that if you change your mind in power, you will be accused of a U-turn. Most of us, but not all, recognise that if you don't change your mind when you are, for example, heading towards an iceberg in a massive boat, then you are an idiot. I would perhaps like a more sophisticated or subtle word than idiot, but I can't think of one. If you are in a boat and there is an iceberg in front of you and you refuse to change course because you are persuaded that either there's no iceberg there at all, it's all a mirage, or that your boat is going to cut through the iceberg. This isn't a Titanic analogy because they didn't spot the iceberg in time. You have spotted the iceberg in time and you are refusing to change course. And that makes you very, very foolish. But if you do change course, you come under attack from almost all sides for being weak or for undertaking a U-turn or for being inconsistent. And that is where Keir Starmer finds himself. And I think under that analysis, it would be absurd of us, of you, of me, not to welcome the U-turn, right? Because what is the alternative? You won't find many corners of the media that present this moment to you as clearly as this. What is the alternative? You have two choices as Prime Minister. The winter fuel, and this is contingent upon the consensus that the winter fuel allowance has been by far the biggest misstep of Keir Starmer's administration. We may have a little look at that. Question whether it is actually, but I think it must be, unless, back to the immigration obsessives, but just parking them for a moment, it is by far the biggest misstep of Keir Starmer's administration, taking away the winter fuel allowance from people easily portrayed as either deserving or needing it or both. And as you turn that very simple moment into a very simple choice, you either stick with it or you abandon it. If you abandon it, you invite valid criticism and valid questions about why you introduced it in the first place. But in the actual moment of choice, in the crucible of options, there are but two. You either do a Thatcher or you do a Starmer. And what's better? A Thatcher, where you stay on your course even as the iceberg rips into the hull of your mighty vessel, or a Starmer, where you recognise that you have made a mistake, that you have got it wrong, and you change course. It may not be that simple. It may not be that straightforward. It's possible that I am suffering from a touch of the old footballification that I often criticise others for. But in order to say that Starmer is wrong to do it, you'd have to explain to me why you think he should leave the winter fuel allowance cut in place. And I think we all recognised pretty quickly that it was far too blunt an instrument for the challenge that it was supposed to address. That thresholds and cut-off points were too stark. So there it is. Imagine, writes Lauren, criticising a captain of a ship for ordering a course correction. Is the captain supposed to just say, sail straight ahead forever? Sarah points out the parallels with Brexit and, of course, the continuing refusal by much of the country, or at least much of the political and media establishment, to recognise the disaster that they have undertaken. Richard in Harrow makes that John Maynard Keynes quote, which is almost certainly not a John Maynard Keynes quote, but I spent 10 years passing it off as the real McCoy, so I can hardly criticise him. When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? And that's the question, really. It's not a particularly tricky one. It's not a particularly sophisticated one. I just really want to know how... And the reason I've taken a moment to lay it out in those terms and to resurrect the ghost of Margaret Thatcher, which few will thank me for, the reason I've done that is because when it actually happens, the media will go bonkers again. The media will turn into a rabid dog of snarling canines. We're a bit better than that now, together, you and me, on this programme. We're a bit cleverer than that. It's a failure by the Labour government. But the question of what the U-turn will do to you is a question that only you can answer. And I would really like you to answer it now. 0345 6060 973. What will you do? What will you how will you respond to the U-turn when it comes? What does it do to your opinion of Keir Starmer? That's the fundamental question. What does it do to your view of this government? Because the catastrophic council results of a few weeks ago were chalked up largely, of course, to the incoherent unhappiness of many, many people who were drawn to the latest snake oil salesman on the block, which unfortunately is the same as the last snake oil salesman on the block and the snake oil salesman on the block before that, the bloke who sold you Brexit, the bloke who sold you Boris Johnson, the bloke who called Liz Truss's budget the best he'd ever seen. I give you, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nigel, currently on holiday, Farage. That was a large part of the collapse in Labour's support, but what the campaigners came back and said was that it was also down to the winter fuel allowance. So if he changes it, what will it do to your view of him? And I'll tell you what, because we're all experts now, what changes would you like to see? What changes would work for you? 0345 6060 973.
LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:22 is the time. I mean, one of the major failures of my profession, and of course it doesn't matter where you get your media, is that 700,000 eligible people are still not claiming pension credit, which means they would also miss out on winter fuel payments that they are entitled to. St Martin Lewis pointed that out earlier this morning. It is a mark of how the conversation has essentially been conducted and dominated by middle-class journalists who will not need this payment, and neither will their parents, instead of focusing exactly on getting the medicine to the places that it is most needed. And of course, very few outlets have bothered to concern themselves with that element of the story, which is why I think Martin Lewis deserves his saintly status. 10:23 is the time. But the U-turn, when it comes, in the loosest of terms, it will involve more pensioners being entitled to and able to claim the payments, which are worth up to £300. How will that U-turn, that change of mind, how will it land in your house? Okay? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Claire's in Ealing. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Lovely to speak to you again. So it would hit massively. So my mum is, I believe, I can't quite remember, I'm afraid. I believe she does get pension credits, and she gets a pension and she also gets PIP, which is, another fear. And, but I think the amount she gets means that she is, I think it's like, she said it was about £2 over the threshold.
Well, if she's getting pension credit, she should get all of it.
I can't remember.
All right,
why,
don't worry.
but
So according to the calculations that your mum has done, she thinks that she just misses out on the £300 a year.
Yes. And her fear is that she's got fibromyalgia and she has to have the heating on whenever it's cold, all day long,
yes,
apart from at night, because the pain is affected by cold. And for her, not being able to put the heating on or having to sort of cut down on everything else, it's just a massive deal. And then also the fear of losing Pip is another one.
Of course, that's on the horizon as well. What does it do? So, I mean, I think that the improvement, the impact, the positive impact on the lives of people who really need it and are set to be denied it it does two things. Number one, it's a bit of a given. So obviously you're going to welcome the actual decision. Number two, they are the ballast on the other side of the scales, I think. It is people like your mum and those in similar positions that have tipped the scales against the policy decision, because had the threshold been somewhere else, people would be broadly, I think, in favour of it. No one thinks that the King should be qualifying for it, or Elton John, who for some reason always gets cited at this point in the conversation. But what about your attitude to Keir Starmer? His personal approval ratings are catastrophically low, and I think this is the biggest reason why. So what would a U-turn do to you?
Well, I do think, and I'm sort of getting to where you want me to go with this. I do think that the threshold matters, because so I'm on Pip. If we lose Pip as well, I'll have to move up there, and we'll both lose complete, a lot of independence, and we will go from being pretty poor but able to heat our homes and eat, to being just destitute. So I do think it's important, because for me personally, I think it would show to me that he really is country over party, because he would be realising that it doesn't matter about him, his approval ratings, what it does to him. This is about stopping people from living lives of such sheer
sure. Isn't it the opposite? Isn't it the opposite? I mean, he's not doing it because so you would actually come away from this thinking he's doing it because he's worried about you and your mum and people like you, not because he's bruised by the council election results.
I think there's an element of cynicism, but it could show that he understands that people really do have a problem with it. Because also, don't forget, there are so many people who vote Reform who don't really know much about Reform. Like, there was that whole thing where Nigel Farage gave that speech and he said, the billionaires are leaving the country, and people cheered. So it's a protest vote.
I missed that. Can we find that footage, please? That sounds funny. Sorry, carry on.
And don't forget, there are so many people that think U-turning is weak.
Yes.
And the reason you're having this conversation is because of that.
Because of what Margaret Thatcher accurately described as the media obsession. And the reason why it's perceived as weak is because it is an admission of failure. And failure is if not weak, then bad. Nobody's perfect, but you make a massive mistake on the biggest stage, as the winter fuel cuts look to be, then a U-turn is actually an admission of failure. But it can also be, under your analysis, an acknowledgement of failure and a determination to restore, a determination to repent, almost to repair.
Absolutely, because don't forget, Kemi Badenoch, or whoever's the leader of the Tories in however many weeks it takes for her to decide that it's not for her, whatever. They will go on about U-turning forever, because that's what Labour did to the Tories whenever they U-turned.
And that's the boring toing and froing, isn't it, of party politics, and that you do what I did, and I'll criticise you just like you criticised me when I did it. And listen, in an ideal world, a really first-class administration wouldn't have made this mistake in the first place. But you've got to be a little bit more intelligent than that if you're going to unpick it properly. And you have to acknowledge that there are only two choices facing Labour. One is a U-turn, and the other is to continue on a path that is being pilloried by everybody. So if you're the leader of the Conservatives, I think you just sort of claim, I'm glad. I think she's at her funniest when she says, I'm glad you've listened to my advice. Do you remember when she said, I've sent you a letter last week and now you're agreeing with me and doing what I said in the letter? And he said, I don't think I read it. I didn't read your letter. Well, who's going to read a letter from Kemi Badenoch? Seriously, could you imagine walking into 10 Downing Street and going up to Keir Starmer and going, there's a letter here from Kemi Badenoch, Sir Keir. I think you should read it immediately, and try not to laugh your head off at that. So that's what she'll do. That's what I would do if I was leader of the opposition. But I'm not really interested in what the leader of the opposition is going to do or think. I'm interested in what you're going to do or think. You, Claire, or Lorraine, who's up next, or you, who could ring 03456 606 0973 and tell me honestly what it will actually do to you. Because if you were minded to rail against the U-turn in classic Thatcherite fashion, then do you realise that means you want it to stay in place? Or is that me being too simplistic or too silly? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Michael's in a bit of a mood. For T's sake of you not spreading misinformation, he writes, which is an indication of how angry he is because he's lost control of his text function. There are two types of pension credit, guarantee credit and savings credit. Only pension credit guarantee credit entitles you to the winter fuel allowance. It's not misinformation, mate. You're telling me something I don't know. Calm down, dear. Honestly. But the U-turn, when it comes, will be greeted by you with what? Warmth, welcome, cynicism, scepticism, negativity, carefully cultivated contempt for Keir Starmer, whatever he does, because he's Labour. And therefore, for the owners of our national newspapers, he is, and an increasing number of broadcasters actually, he is somehow poisonous. Imagine you were in the passenger seat of a car, okay? Don't play this game if you're actually driving. Imagine you were in the passenger seat of a car and you were heading for a brick wall or, I don't know, like a dangerous bit or a cliff. So there you are, right? Okay, sitting there, and I'm driving, okay, which is already scary enough. Let's not lie. So here I am. I just changed gear then. And you can see the wall ahead. And you say, James, there's a wall ahead. And I say, oh, don't worry about that. We'll be fine. What are you going to tell me to do? What are you going to tell me to do? Exactly. So I then stop the car, undertake a 3-point turn, not a U-turn, because it's quite a narrow piece of road, and off we go back in the opposite direction. Highway code for you there, lads. What are you going to say to, you absolute wet wipe? I can't believe you've just done a U-turn. Or are you going to say, I'm never getting in a car with you again, but thank goodness you made that turn in time. I think that I'm never getting in a car with you again is an interesting new dimension to the question of what it's going to do to your opinion of this government when, because it is when, it's not if, they, quotes, U-turn on the winter fuel question. Lorraine is in Whitehaven in Cumbria. Lorraine, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I believe that Keir Starmer has an absolute, probably once only golden opportunity to restore some faith, some much needed faith in our politicians and our political system. If he stands up and says, look, guys, we got this wrong. We did it for the right reasons. We maybe should have taken some more time. We have listened to you. We're going to go back to the drawing board and we're going to look at how we can implement a fairer, less punitive policy. Then he will restore faith. And if he says sorry, but if he does what I think he's going to do, and I am waiting with bated breath.
Yes.
I listened to Nick Simmons on Question Time last night, and what the direction of travel seems to be is they are going to do this U-turn, but they're going to try to present it as they've suddenly found some money, that things have suddenly got better, and they're going to try and treat us, the voting public, as idiots. That's his Dominic Cummings moment. Remember when he went into the Rose Garden?
Yeah, of course I do.
And hoodwinked the country into getting us.
Are you suggesting that he didn't drive his infant son to Barnard Castle and back to test his eyes? You're a very cynical lady, Lorraine.
Exactly. And I believe that this is the equivalent moment of that. And I am, as a former Labour Party member, I am waiting to see how Starmer and his team handle this. And if they decide to spin it and try to hoodwink us, instead of just being honest, you know, that word that we seem to have all lost in politics.
This is you're brilliant.
Honest.
You're brilliant, Lorraine, because I mean you've cut much more effectively to the heart of this issue than I did, and I spoke for 20 minutes at the top of the show. Do you know that
I've been shouting at the TV for the last 3 days, just say sorry, just stand up and say sorry.
Because as you have correctly identified, the narrative at the moment, one Downing Street aide last week said, and I quote, "If we've now found £1.5 billion, surely we can use it to improve lives rather than on retired millionaires." And that's what you're talking about. Please don't tell us that you found £1.5 billion down the back of the sofa.
Exactly.
Tell us that you made a mistake and you're making amends.
Exactly. And I can't believe how a political team around him could be so detached from what people out here are thinking that they can't see that that is not only the right thing to do, but it's the most expedient thing to do for them, because he could cut the legs off people who call him flip-flop, because he's doing it for a genuine reason. He's shown that he's listening, because I don't believe he's a cruel man.
No.
I don't believe, you know, that he doesn't feel the impact of the decisions he makes. But I've been so disappointed with what's been put out by Labour since they came into power. And I am waiting to see what he does, because if he spins it, I will not be restoring my membership of the Labour Party. I keep waiting for something that will make me do that.
Well, you know, there's a railway that's been nationalised today. Did you know that? Again, it's you
didn't.
know. No, you see, because that's Britain. That's Brexit Britain for the operator of one of Britain's busiest commuter services will become the first train company to be nationalised under the Labour government. The Transport Secretary has announced South Western Railway, which anyone who uses Waterloo will be taken into public ownership on. Take a guess when, Lorraine, because you know how slowly the wheels of politics can sometimes move. Guess when?
I have no idea.
Sunday.
But sometime in the future.
Sunday.
Someday.
Sunday. That's pretty good. All right.
Sunday.
Yes.
Oh, I thought you said someday.
No,
Sunday. No,
not so.
good.
Lords, I need to clarify this for other people listening. Can we do subtitles? Can you get my teeth? I think I've left them in the gents. Sunday. S-U-N Day. S-U-N Day.
No,
and then
that's great.
July the 20th, C2C will move into public hands, and Greater Anglia follows suit on October the 12th. So, I mean, you wouldn't know it from much of the media coverage of politics in this country, but that's 3 railways that are going to be in public hands by the autumn. That's a good old policy for proper Labour supporters, isn't it?
It is, but again, it speaks to their team need to be much more aggressive getting their message out there with the media, and they need to take the media on instead of pussyfooting around and coming out with a script. And I've just about stopped watching political programmes because my mental health can't take it.
No, you haven't. You watched
anymore.
Question Time last night. You just told me.
I said just about. I listen to you religiously.
You got me.
I listen to you every morning.
I love your analysis. Thank you for that as well.
Okay. I mean, I do feel very strongly please just do the right thing. And I do believe it will change the view that people have of politicians. And he's got this one time only chance to do it. If he doesn't do it, if he spins it, I think Labour are dead in the water, because I don't think they'll ever recover from this.
So even if they do the right thing, if they do it in the wrong way, it may not actually have any political capital whatsoever. It won't change the fact that the people who are most worried about the imposition of the cut would actually have their lives improved. That's a win, objectively speaking. But goodness me, Lorraine, that is... I mean, there's a piece by Patrick Maguire in the Times today. Patrick Maguire is one of my favourite commentators, and I mean, crikey, I'm so old now, I almost called him one to watch, but he's one of the senior writers on the Times, so I don't think you could chalk that up as one to watch. But he essentially makes the points that Lorraine makes, but I don't think he'd mind if I suggested not quite as articulately, or he brings a little bit more into the game than that simple pivot, that central problem of pretending that you're doing it because you have somehow found some money down the back of the national sofa, or admitting that you're doing it because you never should have done it in the first place. I wonder how widespread Lorraine's opinion is. John in Leeds says that's a totally mad opinion, and Serena writes, Lorraine is spot on. So all human life is here. 10:41 is the time. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Listen, the story about the nationalisation is in the Times today. It's in Rupert Murdoch's Times. I mean, and it's not tucked away in the middle of nowhere. It's on page 2, which is sometimes ignored because you always read the right-hand facing page as you make your way through a newspaper. But observations like this are redundant in an online world, in an internet world. I don't know how big it is on websites, but that's partly going to be defined by how many people are clicking on it. But yes, I think it is a very big story. Public ownership of railways is moving on apace. In fact, it's arriving at platform 2 on Sunday. And yet, an awful lot of people out there don't think that this is a Labour government. 10:42 is the time. Paul's in Twickenham. Paul, what would you like to say?
I think, James, it's if it is restored, it's bowing to the inevitable, but it won't. I think the last call has really covered all the points I would make on that. The only thing I'd say extra, James, is it would help his image slightly if he were to do something really radical and say to people, look, the middle-class journalist you referred to, James, who doesn't need the winter fuel allowance, when people are advised of what the allowance will be and how they'll receive it and when they'll get it, if it contained an opt-out, so that the person who knows they don't need it because they're very comfortably off could say, I don't need this, and he could say the money that you don't claim will go into the NHS and education, and it would restore a sort of trust with the public, in my opinion. It would be treating the public as adults instead of decreeing who will get it and who won't. The people who need it, obviously pension credits, and the people who need it, they get it automatically. And he should say that. He should say, if you have to think whether you need this allowance,
keep it.
You're getting it.
I've heard this, and I bet you weren't expecting a scrap when you rang in with that very generous and thoughtful point, but I could not disagree with you more strongly. I mean, it's a charter for greed, letting people who will never, ever, ever offer up a penny voluntarily to help anybody but themselves off scot-free, while leaning heavily upon the consciences and decency of people, I suspect, like you, Paul, or my mum, and one of her neighbours who was telling me they already make an exact donation of the money they receive for the winter fuel allowance to Great Ormond Street in their case. So I just think it is. I wish that humanity was the right species with which to do what you describe, but I don't think we are, mate.
Well, James, I have one final point on that. In the olden days, medieval times, every Englishman was expected to keep a bow and arrow in his house and to practice target shooting on Sunday in case the enemy invaded, in case the French came over and invaded. So at that time, the English common man was trusted.
No, he wasn't.
That he was part of the nation.
Don't be ridiculous, Paul. What would have happened to him if he didn't turn up, do you think?
Oh, no, there's no. I don't think there's any enforcement of it,
What do you
James.
think the stocks were for? Of course there was enforcement of it. There's no earthly way that you weren't going to get a slap around the back of the head and a night in the pokey if you didn't turn up to do your archery practice on Sunday afternoons.
Oh, well, you may be right, James, but I thought it sounded good.
It is good, and I'm a big fan of butts. I'm a big fan. I love big butts. I love the butts. I cannot lie. But no, you can't trust the public to do the right thing, Paul. I don't know how you voted in 2016, but we did that with the referendum, didn't we? And look how that turned out.
Well, I still think there's a place for not treating the public.
But there's
always
you can always make voluntary donations to the Treasury. Some people do it in their wills, in their last will and testament, actually. But no, because it's the worst imaginable scenario. And in your case, it's come from the best imaginable place. It's come from your heart, and it speaks to a great respect and reverence for your fellow man. But you're looking in the mirror and you're seeing yourself, Paul. You're not seeing the person behind you going, yeah, all right, you can make a voluntary donation. And hopefully that will mean my taxes come down. The more people make voluntary donations who can afford it, then the more likely it is that my income tax will come down, and I'm already considerably richer than Yao. I used to think that, but it's what people say when you suggest that people like me should be paying more tax. And then they say, well, why don't you then? And you kind of go, well, I mean, two things, really. Nobody knows anybody else's financial arrangements when it comes to direct debits and support for charities and good causes and giving up time or money to do things that are not rewarded in a material sense. But crucially, if you make it voluntary, then the worst people win. That's the whole point about taxation. It's the single most collective fiscal policy imaginable. You know, everybody has to put their shoulder to the wheel according to what they have. And everybody, of course, benefits from the turning of the wheel according to what they need. Almost sounds like socialism.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got a really good misinformation for you, which I'm tempted to get it out there now because I think I've let you down a bit on the Chagos business. Can you guess why? It just all seemed a little bit complicated, and everything I was reading was coming from the sort of screechy right-wing end of the British media, talking about surrender and giving it up. And so I actually undertook a little bit of research on your behalf. I sort of try and find out what the actual facts were. And you'll never guess what the root cause of the UK's unavoidable ceding of sovereignty over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius is. And I mean it. You will never guess in a million years. In fact, I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'm going to play a game and see if you can guess. So first of all, I'm telling you that you will never guess what the root cause of the legal necessity that sees the UK hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. It's a process of decolonialisation. I don't know how much you know about this, but we essentially handed most of Mauritius back to Mauritius after we took it over from the French as a colony, and we just moved everyone off the relevant islands. We moved everyone off Diego Garcia. Just that's it. Sorry, you're going to have to find somewhere else to live. We're keeping these bits, and now we have to give them back, which some people are very cross about. The kind of people who think we shouldn't talk about how awful slavery was. They're going to be very, very cross about it. Very cross. But why? And of course, they are more likely to have voted Brexit than the rest of us are. Well, I've just given you a bit of a clue. What do you think the root cause of the legal necessity of handing the Chagos Islands back to Mauritius actually, if you bother to do your own research, actually turned out to be? 10:52 is the time. I will tell you shortly. Let's see if anyone's got it. Rob's playing. Well, was it wokeness? Almost, Rob. Almost. Was it white privilege? No. I mean, white privilege explains why France and the UK owned Mauritius at various points in its history, of course, but no, it's not that. Ditto imperialism. Quite a few of you are getting it right. Ewan's very close. He says, "Is it 3-pin plugs, James?" Rob got it in his first answer. He nailed it early doors, so I think he is the winner before I'd even given the clue. But that means he might have known. He might be one of the only other people in the country who've actually done their research on this. Unlike pretty much every pundit, commentator and right-wing politician in the country. 10:52 is the time. Before I do the big reveal, Carol is in Enfield on the winter fuel question. Carol, what would you like to say?
Hi. I can't believe I've got through, and I have to say I've had at least 100 conversations with you in my head.
Gosh, what did I say?
Yeah.
Was I funny?
Just didn't say anything. You just let me talk and didn't interrupt me.
Well, I hope that hasn't given you an elevated expectation about this conversation's going to go, Carol.
Yeah, I'm very, very nervous.
It's only me. It's only me.
I know, and I do sometimes have to look up the words that you use because I need to know what they mean. But I'm digressing. Anyway. Keir Starmer will never be popular and he will never be trusted. He has done loads of U-turns. Yeah. He U-turned on the energy, nationalising the energy companies, scrapping student loans. As Prime Minister, though, I think. I know, but anyone worth their salt, any politician worth their salt would know the state of the economy. They would know beforehand what the state of the economy. Any politician or economist would know. Not me or you or just laymen. They would know. He kept the 2-child benefit cap. He cozied up to the WASPy wing, even though it wasn't in the manifesto. But he cozied up and led people to believe that the Labour Party was going to do something about it.
True.
So
and people got to remember, when he stood at the last election, he lost 18,000 votes. So he's never, ever going to be popular, and he's never going to be trusted. He also said, country before party. And when MPs voted to bring back, to scrap the two-child benefit cap, they lost the whip. You know, people seem to be suffering with amnesia. So I'm a mother and a grandmother. I've never canvassed in my life. But when I saw him saying one thing and then saying that he never said it, and reneging on the things that he said he was going to do, I went to his constituency and I canvassed to unseat him. That's how. And
Who did you canvass for?
Feinstein.
What was that? Was that an independent candidate?
Yeah, Andrew Feinstein. I canvassed for him, and I think if it hadn't been called so quickly, there were people from all over the country coming to his constituency to canvass.
This is, I say this entirely out of curiosity and not in any way out of.
I know what you can ask me.
What?
No, please.
No, because you're the one that's had loads of conversations in your head. But what am I going to ask you?
I know you're going to ask me if I'm a Corbynite.
Well, I was going to say, is this all about loyalty to the last leader?
No, it's got nothing to do with that loyalty to the last leader.
How do you know that's what I was going to say then?
Because I've heard you ask other people.
But wasn't Feinstein part of that? Wasn't Andrew Feinstein part of that?
Andrew, I canvassed for.
But that doesn't actually. I'm only saying out of curiosity because it doesn't actually undermine any of the things that you've just said. Except that some people find it very hard to forgive Keir Starmer for actually winning a general election. I don't think you are one of them.
No. But the overall number of votes that the Labour got was less than the previous election. It wasn't.
Yeah, but
he won more seats,
that's a turnout question. I mean, this is why we probably shouldn't have opened this door. That's because so many people were motivated to vote by a deep desire to keep Jeremy Corbyn out of Downing Street. It was the reason given by the main reason.
I don't really want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn.
Nor do I ever. But here we are. So my fault. You read my mind. You read my mind, Carol. So there's nothing he can do.
I don't want to talk about Jeremy
At what point?
Corbyn. I want to talk about the Labour Party.
Well, I'm going to run out of time. I've got to do my payoff on the Chagos Islands.
I've always voted for Labour, always. And I was unable to because of Keir Starmer and the people he's surrounded himself by. And you've got to remember, West Street, he nearly lost his seat too. So when you say you're going to renationalise the energy companies, scrap student loans, get rid of the two-child benefit.
But also bring in workers' rights legislation, raise minimum wage, nationalise the railways.
No, I understand that.
No one can do everything.
But no, they can't. But to lift over 300,000 children out of poverty is a big thing for people.
It is.
It's massive, and
there's a line in Hamilton which is my favourite musical, and talking to Aaron.
I don't know anything about Hamilton.
No, I'm going to tell you. The bloke who ends up killing him. Spoiler alert, but it is actual history. So he says. If you fall for anything, if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything. Or if you stand for... I'll get there in the end, Carol. Be patient. If you I bet I was more clear than this when I was talking in your imagination. If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And that, I think, is pretty much how you're describing Keir Starmer.
I'm looking at what he's actually done and doing.
Yes, exactly. I mean, a vacuum in the heart of number 10.
Yeah, but these things are really important. The energy companies, there's people weeping about our rivers. There are children who are going hungry. People are weeping about these things. You can't just, he's done, he's given a pay rise to the doctors and nurses and.
Well, that's quite a big deal.
Any politician of their sort
yes.
would know the state of the economy, and any politician of their sort.
That's where we started, and I didn't jump in because I wanted it to be different from the conversations we've had in your imagination, and it's just not true. Digging into why the gulf between what they thought they were inheriting and what they were actually inheriting is, and I don't want to patronise you because your contribution has been absolutely brilliant. I don't know what you're nervous about. It is, the evidence is there, and I mean, I grant you that you didn't want to talk about him, but there is an air of never being able to forgive Keir Starmer for actually winning a general election and then pointing out all the things he hasn't done, which he promised to do when he wasn't in power, instead of focusing on all the things that he has done. Which brings us back to how many people have been in touch today to reveal that you had absolutely no idea that they were starting the process of rail nationalisation on Sunday.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I can't win, can I? I absolutely can't win. So I didn't do the reveal on the hook and tease because I wanted to prove to Carol that her dreams about me weren't necessarily entirely accurate, and I wasn't going to interrupt her every 30 seconds and give her plenty of time to make her case very powerfully, which she did, which meant I didn't reveal to you why all of the right-wing gnashing of teeth and clutching of pearls with regard to the legal requirement, effectively, to cede control of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius has its roots in the most unexpected place. Some of you have correctly guessed. I may have given you a slight clue, and I will tell you, and this is a promise, Keith, write this down, I will tell you at 20 past 11. I will explain to you at 20 past 11 exactly what the root of the so-called Chagos Islands deal is, because it is one of my all-time favourite examples of media
missed information.
Thank you, Emily. But the time now has come to talk of many things, of something sealing wax, of cabbages and kings. No, a story that's been bubbling under my consciousness for some time, for reasons that, for those of you kind enough to have followed my life and career for some time, will be able to work out quite easily. It's still a few years off for us, and I'm not entirely confident that we'll be in a position to be on the right side of history when the moment comes. But 52% of first-time buyers last year got help from their parents to buy a home. It's that bloody ratio again. 52, 48. 52% of first-time buyers got help from their parents to buy their first home. The divide between those with family wealth and those without is getting wider and wider and wider. And I mean, you know what questions I'm going to ask you about this. I want to know what it means. I want to know how it feels. I want to know how much envy there is, whether you're looking at some sort of almost social life breakdown according to who can and who can't. Because the tragic reality of this is that some of the people who can't buy a property will be buying a property for the people who can. They will be paying rent effectively on properties that are mortgaged, and the rent that the landlord receives will be servicing the mortgage. That means they will ultimately own it, and they are likely to be the parents of people who they can help, the parents of young people that they can actually help. The inheritocracy, SEMA calls it. And this is another example of why sometimes that leftist obsession with letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I don't like this guy because he hasn't done absolutely everything that I want him to do, and the last guy promised to do but was never in a billion years going to get the chance to implement. You look at that and you forget that there's absolutely nothing wrong with wealth. The problem is inequality. There's nothing, I'm not quite in Peter Mandelson territory of suggesting that we are supremely comfortable with the supremely wealthy, but I'm not far away from it. If there's no inequality, I don't care how rich you are. If there's no poverty, you can be as rich as Croesus. It's a wonderful podcast by my friend Alex Andreou called Podyssey, and one of the recent episodes looked at the myth of Midas, King Midas, or Midas, whatever you prefer. Absolutely brilliant, so illuminating, and not at all, the roots of that myth, and not at all what you might think they were from the old kind of simplistic, everything he touches turns to gold trope. But I digress. He could have been as rich as Midas. And that's the problem, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with wealth, and there's nothing wrong with a hierarchy of wealth. Someone is always going to have more than you, and someone is always going to have less. Unless, I suppose, you're Elon Musk or the poorest person on the planet, who's quite possibly, as long as, well, no. I think it's foolish to focus on that. If you took all the money in the world, and I'm far from the first person to have pointed this out, if you took all the money, all the assets in the world, and divided them by the number of people in the world, and dished it all out equally at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you would have people who had more money than they'd ever need, and you'd have people who were struggling to feed themselves. That is just the nature of things. There'd be theft, there'd be gambling, there'd be trading, there'd be, maybe not in an hour, but you take my point. If you divided all the money, some people would have drunk their share, some people would have smoked it. If you took all the money in the world and divided it equally among all the people in the world, then in the blink of an eye, you would have epic inequality in place once again, unless you had proper regulation, taxation, all that kind of thing. Inequality, inheritocracy, that's a great word. I don't know if Seema came up with that. If she didn't, it'd be a great title for a book for somebody. Gary Stevenson speaks very, very powerfully about how the engines of greed, if you think of how the financial institutions now are dedicated exclusively and entirely to ever greater enrichment of a tiny number. It's all about getting more and more money. So where do they go next? And the answer is the middle classes. And in a way, this story speaks to the fact that people who might once have expected to become property owners, if they don't have parental help, no longer will be able to. So that asset-owning class, for the first time in living memory, the asset-owning class is shrinking. And the only people who are going to be able to get into it are either the relatively small number who secure jobs that pay enough money to save a deposit while you're paying somebody else rent, or the people who can leapfrog the saving of the deposit stage by dint of accepting the money from their parents. And I think part of the reason I balk slightly at what I call lazy leftism is the idea that there's anything wrong with that. The idea that if you were lucky enough to be in that situation, then the first people you'd help wouldn't be your children. I know we occasionally read about very rich and famous people who talk about not handing on all their money to their children, but I'll tell you for nothing, their children won't be going without. They're just not going to be necessarily handed the keys to the castles and the palaces, because some parents think that, I think Paul McCartney was one of them, wasn't he? He was very keen for his children not to be corrupted, if you like, by the trappings of his epic wealth, and I admire that. But if you think that anybody in that category would be struggling, then I've got a bridge to sell you. That there is absolutely nothing wrong with inheritocracy. I'd tax it a little bit better. I'd be, again, something I think Keir Starmer's got right with the farmers. But that's not today's conversation. The idea that you're going to help your children, what is the point of money if not to help the people that you love the most, right? Can we all agree on that, whether you've got any or not? I think we can, can't we? I'd set against that very quickly and very briefly the absolute obnoxiousness of people when you're talking about private school fees who think that they are only in a position to exercise that enormous privilege because they have, quotes, worked so hard. As if, people putting in 14-hour days in an Amazon warehouse are just having a bit of a holiday, or people down coal mines historically are just swinging the lead or taking it easy. There is very little relationship between how hard you work and how much you earn. It's got a lot more to do with what social class you're in, what your parents did, how educated you are, where you live, what horizons you have, whether you've gone to uni. Anyway, I digress. Because a comparison of first-time buyer purchases now shows the huge leg up gained by buyers who got help from their parents. I'm not criticising the parents, I'm not criticising the children. I hope to be one of those parents one day. But I want to know what it means. I don't know what it means. So when I left university, whether you were my mate who was actually the son of a coal miner from the northeast, or whether you were my mate whose house had an actual moat with fish in it, you would have had not equal expectations of the property that you were going to own in terms of its scale and its size, but your expectation of property ownership would have been identical. My mate from the northeast was absolutely on the path towards property ownership in the same way that my mate with a moat was. And I sit somewhere between those two positions, and I knew I would become a property owner sooner rather than later as well. As it turned out, I think I was 28. And I did so, as I've told you before, with a 110% mortgage. A 110% mortgage, which younger people today find almost impossible to comprehend or conceive of. So they gave us enough to buy the house, and then we had 10% more just to buy stuff. And no, I'm not telling you what we spent it on. I couldn't believe it, writes Joe, when my co-worker said that his parents had given them a 6-figure deposit. I couldn't believe it. We are currently moving money around just to buy groceries. That, Joe, is the best text I've had in a long time, because at 13 minutes after 11, you have cut, in a way I try to do at the top of every hour, to the absolute heart of what I'm driving at. Two people doing the same job. And let us say, for the sake of argument, earning the same scratch. They're on the same salary. And the bank of mum and dad gives one of them not just a little tickle, not just a leg up, gives one of them a 6-figure deposit for a property, while the co-worker on the same salary is moving money around out towards the end of every month just to meet the grocery bills. Cost of living meets salary meets inheritance. It's an incredible vignette, that, of everything that is going on. And that's what I want to talk about. I don't have a laser-like question on this one, but I want to know what it's doing and what it means in your life. What's your story like Joe's? And I don't want anybody who is benefiting from the bank of mum and dad to feel either, unless you're going to tell me that it's absolutely the natural order of things and your parents worked bloody hard and it's not your fault if Joe's parents didn't, yeah? Okay, yeah. All off to Hampshire for the weekend, bang, bang. No, I mean, I am prepared to offend you because you are an absolute blancmange. But for the rest of us who recognise the role that serendipity and good fortune play in most of the cards that we end up holding by the time we reach adulthood, I want to know where this leads us. What are the changes in our society going to be from the days when you would either have a reliable provision of social housing or you would have a realistic expectation of property ownership? We've talked a lot in the past about what it means to realise that you don't. But I think that ship has sailed. It was one of my favourite subjects on the programme about 10 years ago, because I could speak to the version of me that was 20 years younger. Because if I had come out of college 20 years later, I don't think I would have been able to get on the property ladder until perhaps I inherited some money or until my salary went into overdrive, which was by no means guaranteed. So I'd have been well into my 30s before we'd have been able to afford a place, because we'd have had to save up a deposit while we were paying rent to somebody else. In other words, we could afford to buy a flat, we just couldn't afford to buy it for ourselves. And I was fascinated by how almost the mirror image of me 20 years younger would be in a completely different financial situation. And of course, the danger always is that you think that people who are 20 years younger than you and in the same situation as you in many ways haven't become property owners because they've messed it up. They've spent too much money on Netflix or avocado on toast or gym memberships. So it's just an ignorance on an almost weaponized level. But it speaks to something that goes so much deeper. So much deeper. It really does. It speaks to a growing gulf between equals in the workplace, equals in society, equals in terms of income and effort and job and achievement, and the gulf between those who have parents who can help them buy a place and those who don't. I think it's one of the most interesting social developments of the last few years, and it's the first time we've actually talked about it. But I need to get the question right. I didn't for Joe. Joe has nailed exactly what I'm talking about. But what does it mean? What does the gulf feel like in your world? The fact that some of us have parents who can afford to help us buy a property and some of us don't. What does that gulf mean, A, in your world, and B, if this isn't you, but you are fond of thinking, and if you listen to this program, I have to conclude that you are probably a little fonder of thinking than the average bear. What's it going to do to society? What does the growth of this gap represent? It didn't really exist when I was in my 20s. As I say, if you were of a similar educational or professional level, you'd have similar expectations of property ownership. I've never fully clocked completely how that has been utterly broken. Utterly broken. But I don't know what it means moving forward. I want to know what it means in your life, in your world, 0345 6060 And I also want to know what it means, what you think it means for society. What does the growth of this gap between peers and equals, whose parents can help them buy a property, and those whose parents can't, what's it going to mean, either in really clever, sophisticated economic terms or simply in terms of your life, your social life or your work life? I really need your help with this because I've actually got nothing to contribute beyond that, I hope, helpful explanation. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And take Joe as the patron saint of this topic at the moment. Actually cannot get his head around the fact that he's sitting next to someone at work doing exactly the same job, same dreams, same aspirations, same ambitions, same achievements, same qualifications, same income. And his parents just bunged him 100 grand to buy a place, and Joe is struggling to pay for his groceries at the end of every month. 0345 6060 973. What does this mean now, and what will it mean soon?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's still 11:20, and the answer's Brexit. Brexit is the actual reason why the UK has been compelled to cede sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, or at least one of the very main reasons. I'm going to explain why later, but I said I'd get the payoff in at 11:20, and I got it in by a matter of nanoseconds. In fact, Ferg wrote, James, it's 11:20, stop waffling and give us the answer. And then adds, well, actually, it's 1:20, sitting by a pool in Egypt. Nobody likes to show off, Ferg, which is also relevant to the conversation that we're going to be having about property ownership. I also, there's a bit missing from the analysis that I just did, isn't there? Which is the role of the parent, how much of a priority you have made helping your children buy a house. Because it's not always going to be money that you've got lying around or spare. It's not down the back of the sofa. You recognise the imminent impact, if it's not there already, of this growing gulf. And therefore, you're prioritising helping money that you were hoping to spend on something else, or money that you were earmarking for something else, or equity that you're releasing from your property because you think that helping your child be on the right side of this growing gap between property haves and property have-nots is one of the greatest gifts, that you can give them. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Let's go to Matt, who's in Dorchester. Matt, what would you like to say? You're a have, I think, rather than a have-not.
Yeah. So me and my wife own our own house. We put down an £80,000 deposit, half of which was paid for by the bank of mum and dad.
Right.
There's no way we could have saved up that money without them. I make that very clear. That was in 2019. I compare myself to my ex-co-workers, friends that are in a similar situation.
Yes.
In those, 8 years or something, we now own 2/3 of a property and are paying about £500 a month in the mortgage. They're paying well over £1,000 a month in rent and own nothing. This is driving society apart. I think that rent prices are ridiculous for what you get for it, and they need to be regulated much more heavily. I often compare this to a friend of mine who was actually my boss at the time, so earning more money than me.
Yeah.
And she had she went to buy a house 2 years after I did. House prices had gone up by about 50k, which is crazy.
Sure.
Like I got so lucky that I bought my house when I did. Not only that, she had a mortgage offer accepted by the bank, offer on a house accepted by the bank. Then Liz Truss happened, and it all fell through. In the years since, she spent about £50,000 on rent that's just been, thrown down the toilet. It's crazy how much, as soon as you get on the property ladder, how much everything opens up for you in terms of the money you can save. Is so much easier to save money. It's so much easier to, invest in other things. I could spend the same amount as what my friends do each month, put 500 in stocks and shares, and that 500 turns into 1,000 by the time I want to spend it. Rent is actually crippling for people my age.
This is a superb contribution. I'm so grateful to you. Well, in many ways, I was expecting the more powerful contributions to come from the other side of the divide, but I don't know why, because You in some ways, you have a much better view, don't you? Because and the fact that she was your boss, that's such a powerful moment, isn't it?
It was almost awkward because we were friends as much as you can be friends with your boss. And, well, no, I do like her, but she was...
Of course, no, I know what you mean. She could still sack you tomorrow.
Well, I was invaluable.
Of course.
But it led to some awkward kind of conversations where we're going, society is just unfair. There's no point.
I hadn't thought of that because you've got that. I mean, there's always the possibility that you're going to be, you're going to be the child of very, very wealthy parents, and you're at the bottom of the work ladder, so that you're going to be spending your weekends or your holidays in places that even your boss can't afford to go or go by. But do you know what I mean? But that would have been so exceptional and so anomalous when I was growing up. It would have involved people who were epically blessed. You're not epically blessed. Your parents managed to find 40 grand. It's not exactly the holiday home in the Maldives or anything like that kind of territory, is it?
Do you know what's crazy now, though?
Go on.
Looking at it now, I still have a mortgage. I've still got £80,000 or something to pay off on it, which is a great position to be in at my age.
Sure.
But if I had, if I had kids or was completely immoral and wanted to buy a second house to rent out because I had no moral fibre whatsoever.
Okay, go on. Now, you've upset a lot of people then, but it was Matt that said that, not me.
Don't, James. That was intentional to upset those people. They're evil people and should be put to the sword. But
people need landlords, Matt. You can't. I mean, obviously you're speaking metaphorically, but we may open up this line of the conversation later.
I'd happily discuss that. That's a different point. The point I was going to make is it's so much easier for me. I reckon I could get another deposit sooner than she can get her final deposit.
Yeah, you could because you've got equity.
That's the other thing. I could borrow off my own house again.
Where does it end, Matt? I mean, you've already given us one fairly big milestone, which is if you've got access to the bank of mum and dad, you're going to actually be more asset rich than your bosses fairly soon. That's an extraordinary observation which hadn't even occurred to me. Where does it end? It's a sense of an apocalypse on the horizon.
I've got some stats for you. So there's in the year 2000 there was 2.5 million homes that were rented. In the year 2025, it's 6 million. If it continues to go on that trend or just stays at that, it's about a quarter to a third of our population that are renting right now. If a quarter to a third of our population never own a home, then what happens when they retire? Because their pension won't be able to cover their rent, and we're going to have like a significant proportion of people. So I think there's going to need to be something done with landlords other than just throwing them in a big pot, which is my solution.
You're not. I mean, you're going to be cheered and booed in almost equal measure on that, although probably more cheered than booed, to be fair. I mean, that is the point. I've asked that question on the show. We've never actually dug into it. Is it a sort of exercise in collective ostrich? Are we all just? I mean, is it as obvious as you and I think it is that there is an absolute reckoning on the horizon, or is it possible that the clever people know something that we haven't quite worked out yet, you and me?
I mean, I think that there's some clever overlords that are thinking this far in the future is very optimistic. Because
you're a master of understatement, Matthew. Very optimistic indeed. Isn't it? I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll fend off all the angry landlords that you have just.
Get me back. I'd love to talk to them in person. I'd love to tell them exactly how immoral they are.
Just final question.
Go on.
How hard was it for your parents to find the cash that they found?
Well, I think
that's me being nosy. You don't have to answer that question. I'm a nosy git.
If I'm honest, it wasn't actually from my parents.
Okay.
It was from my wife's grandparents.
Right. There you go.
Basically got to the stage where they, were comfortable and couldn't go on, they're not going out every night. They're 80. They're not going out. They're not going on holidays. So it was just, I don't want to say lying around. But it was there. It was there.
It was dormant and they put it to work. And you have benefited from that on a scale that even in my introduction and even reading the story and even referencing the infernal ratio of 52% getting help from parents to buy a home, I hadn't acknowledged just how urgent this situation could be. And Matt, as I said, Joe's text was absolutely first class and Matt's call was absolutely first class. Don't feel you have to reach that dizzy height with your contribution, because I want to hear it anyway. But there is a sense, isn't there? It's the worst possible territory for a phone-in, when you've got a kind of a sense of something huge happening, but no one can either confirm or deny that it is on the horizon, when it's going to arrive, or what it's going to look like when it does. So give me a ring if you know what's on the horizon, can tell me what's on the horizon, or have the first idea of when it's going to arrive, if indeed it exists. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need, and I'll give you the full explanation of why all of the usual suspects gnashing their teeth and clutching their pearls about the ceding of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius are, if they voted for Brexit, personally responsible for it. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:32 is the time. Okay, thinking caps on. I mean, there is, as a couple of you reminded me, Gary Stevenson, when he came on Full Disclosure, got over 1 million views on YouTube. I love Gary. He explained one element of what the future is going to look like. People buying second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth homes. Not massive property portfolios, but ordinary people with equity. People like Matt, who don't have the moral qualms that he articulated about owning rental properties. That constituency will become fat. It'll be the same number of people in it. Well, no, the number of people in it will shrink, but they will become fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter as more and more people find themselves in the situation of not being able to get on the ladder. People like Matt's boss. That's why it was such a brilliant call. What does that mean for the future? And then you've got this this is almost a cliff I'm too scared to look over. What happens when all of these people, this generationally unique number of people who are renting when they might realistically have expected to be owning, what happens when they all reach retirement age, or when they all stop earning? Winter fuel allowance in the first hour, of course, but a couple of you have pointed out what's going to happen when the majority of people who need it also have to rent. The cost of our social responsibility rights, Mark. What's on the horizon? I know this is a big one. It's too big for me to get a proper handle on, but it's not stopping me from inviting you to try. What's it going to mean when that 52% becomes 60%? I can't see any other course ahead for the country. 52% currently get help from parents to buy a home, of first-time buyers. Give it a few years, it'll be 55%, 60%, 65%, 70%. And then the number of parents who are in a position to help begins to shrink, because your parents were part of the category who didn't get help to buy, so couldn't. People like me who got no help to buy from our parents. What happens when we can't buy? And then we can't help our children. Do you see? There's something huge here. I can't quite nail down what it is. I'm going to talk to Tina, who's in High Wycombe, and then I'm going to give you chapter and verse on why Brexit helped Britain lose the Chagos Islands, because, let's be honest, there's probably only two other outlets in the entire British media that are going to give you the truth about that particular story, instead of just giving you some red meat and inviting you to chomp on it. Tina is in High Wycombe, as promised. What would you like to say?
I'm a parent, and I'm one of the people that I could say, on paper, we are privileged. I own my own home. My kids went to university. They're both doing very well. Can't afford to get on the property ladder, paying a fortune in rent. I feel a failure because I can't give my kids that step up that their cohort have. You know, they've got parents that bought flats for them in London. They've got big deposits. We also have another thing which I think is a ticking time bomb. Everything that I can give my children is locked up in the house that I own.
Yes.
I am terrified that I will use any equity I have in care home fees. I saw both my parents, and I had to use every penny they had on their care. And I was fine about it because my husband and I were in a situation where we had our home. We had a mortgage then, but we were okay. Our kids had been brought up, and we thought the social contract was we gave them a good education, that they did their duty, whatever, that they would be in the same situation as we are now. They're not. So I'm absolutely terrified that I will not be in a situation that I can give anything that I own to my children, because I don't want it. I don't want to live like my parents did, and, you know, live a lesser quality of life.
What do you mean?
And it
What do you
sounds
mean by that?
horribly
I don't know what that last bit means. Sorry, I'm probably being a bit...
It means that my parents both died in very unpleasant circumstances. My mum had a very bad stroke, lost her ability to speak and eat. My dad had Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So all the money was spent on their care. They had no dignity, no quality of life. I don't want that. I would rather give my money to my children, but there's no facility for that. So you have a situation where you've got parents like me who feel like an utter failure because we can't help our kids, and are seeing exactly what this caller before said, that all their money is going on rent.
I mean, and of course, as you will acknowledge, it is in the great scheme of things. You're not going to be at the front of the queue for anybody else's sympathy, are you?
No, absolutely. And I don't want their sympathy. All I'm saying is that...
Well, the social contract should be something that we all care about. And increasingly, and in a growing number of subjects on this programme, it is pointed out from people from a dizzying array of perspectives and experiences that it is not working. It is being broken. The other end of the deal is not being kept. And there's no particular... I mean, I don't know whether you buy lottery tickets or not, but there's no particular light at the end of the tunnel you're describing, is there?
No, because everything I can afford to live. My kids are okay. They're very lucky, and they know it, and I know it, and I know I'm in a lucky position. But what I hate is that I can't help my kids get to the same position that I was in, and even though we're in the situation. And so I can only imagine how hard it is for everybody else, and that is the tough thing. That
how does it affect
if
them?
You work hard.
Yeah, exactly. And well, I mean, I think that Matt's boss not being able to get a property when he, by benefit of his wife's grandparents, he could. That's going to take some beating as a thumbnail sketch of how bad this situation is, isn't it? How does it affect the kids, Tina?
I think it's the level of inequality. I mean, they're bright kids, they're good kids.
Yeah.
They understand. You know, my youngest just said to me recently, she said, "Mum, I know how lucky I am. I just don't feel it."
And that means that the ground beneath her feet is not as firm as the ground beneath your feet was when you were her age.
No.
And that's going to speak to psychology, to mental health. It's going to speak to all sorts of things that may be largely invisible. Listen, Kathy has said something which you have prompted her to think, and you prompted me to think it as well. And I'm going to very cautiously put it in front of you and wonder whether it's something that you've thought about as well, because a couple of the things you've said suggest that it might be. She says, Kathy writes, Tina, your current caller, is the reason why I worry so much about them wanting to bring in assisted dying.
That's not the reason why. I'm absolutely the opposite. I would, and this may sound completely immoral, and I don't really want to go down this, but I would rather not be here. I would rather, if I didn't have a quality of life, I would like the choice, because I saw both my parents in very difficult circumstances.
So I mean, she's speaking to that thought, but you're speaking to a slightly different one. I mean, she's imagining a parent who thinks, even regardless of quality of life, who thinks, right, I've had my time and my kids aren't going to be able to have financial security as long as I'm here, so I'll shuffle off this mortal coil now, which isn't an option.
That's what I to be honest, that is something in my mind.
Blimey. Thank you, Tina. And I mean, as I said, it's somewhat hard to articulate precisely what we're describing, but the great Bill Deeds once said that a good anecdote, when he was working for the Diary, he said a good anecdote can sometimes convey more than 2,000 words of biography, and sometimes a phone-in show can be like that. A really good story somehow, a really good experience, a personal perspective like Matthew's or Tina's or Joe's can somehow... Or Kathy's, actually. A lot of you thinking about the big questions of where this is going to leave us in the future. And it means that if you have got any equity, you have got any assets, you either have to find a way of sharing it or a way of passing it on. And there is generally, for most of us, only one way of passing it on. Chris is in Thornton in Lancashire. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Slightly terrified, so bear with me.
It's only me, Chris. It's only me.
I know, but you know, just a bit of a comment, really. I'm just been listening, and I just wanted to kind of add me 2 pennies worth. As I was saying to your researcher, I've just bought my first house at the age of 52.
Gosh.
And I know, and I've got I work full time, I've got a reasonably well-paid job, etc., etc.
Yes.
And my rent was in the other house was £750 a month, and my mortgage is £766 a month.
Right.
So it's £16 a month more. But
Mate, I may not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I had worked that last bit out myself.
I know. But just to give it some context, the only reason this is a 2-bedroom terraced house. It's not, it's not. It's a run-of-the-mill house, and the only reason why I was able to do that was because my mum passed away and left me and my sister a little bit of money, which I used for the deposit. That was the only way I was able to buy it. And
so you can afford to pay the mortgage because you were paying exactly that for the last however many years. But in the absence of being able also to save for a deposit, property ownership would have been forever out of your reach.
And it was terrifying because I'm 53 now. What happens in 15 years' time when I retire?
I don't know.
Exactly. How do I pay that?
That's what's on the horizon. I mean,
that's what's on the horizon.
That's one of the reasons Kathy brought Dignitas into the conversation, because what are people going to do when they get to it's a bit Soylent Green, isn't it? How can I ask you how does it feel different to be a homeowner, regardless of your age? Do you feel that your relationship with society is different or not?
To be honest, James, I feel safer. I feel more secure because there's always that 8-week eviction.
That's what I meant about the ground between Tina's daughter's feet being firmer than it, being less firm than it was when Tina was her age.
Yeah, I mean, I've had these no-fault eviction notices in the past. We've had to move, perfectly settled. Luckily, was able to find a house around the corner.
But it's still not ideal. It's a form of hypervigilance, isn't it? I mean, the things that we need most, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Exactly. It's Maslow, isn't it?
I think it
is. We collected the keys from the estate agents on a Friday afternoon. And I went to pick my son up, who lives around the corner with his mum. Yeah. He's here half the week, so it affects him as well.
Yes.
And we walked in the door. I unlocked the door, and I said, "Reuben, nobody can touch us now."
Oh, mate, stop it.
It still makes me quiver thinking about it. You know what I mean? But it's that important on my basic need level. It's that important. And, it's like, this is going to be yours one day, Reuben. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just crazy.
And the gap is growing. And the gap is growing. And you snuck in, really, on the right side of the gap by dint of your mother being able to leave you a relatively small amount, and if she hadn't,
it wasn't. It was a relatively small amount.
Yeah.
Because the lady before my mum had a massive stroke and was in a care home, she was self-funding that herself. So, what a surprise! There was anything left at the end of it, think of this house as Mum's house somehow.
That's lovely. And Reuben's. That's really lovely. Really, really. You've put tears in my eyes, Chris, actually. And I'm not the hardest man on the block, but I wasn't expecting it this hour. I really wasn't. God bless. And what do you say to someone who's moved into a new home? Is it happy home? There's nothing you say, is there? I don't know. But whatever it is, I'm saying it to you now. And so are hundreds of thousands of other people. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Chagos. That's how I've reminded myself to come back and give you the payoff on the hook and tease. Even Napoleon is involved in this story. Did you know that? Treaty of Paris, go on. Treaty of Paris, anybody? 1814, I think. The end of the Napoleonic Wars. And as part of the Treaty of Paris, France handed over what we now know as Mauritius. It was previously, known as Ile-de-France, actually. But anyway, they handed it over, Ile-de-France and the Chagos Islands, to the United Kingdom. So that was in 1814. Fast forward to hang on a minute. We should be giving this the full treatment, shouldn't we? We should.
Missed information.
Thank you, Emily. So it's a very, very widely reported story, but I can't remember a more powerful example of how hard the media works to mislead the British public in connivance with right-wing politicians like Farage and Johnson and the rest of them. So the story begins in 1715, effectively, when the Chagos Islands were part of France's Indian Ocean possessions, administered through the Ile-de-France. Fast forward to 1814, and the Treaty of Paris saw France cede the Chagos Islands to the United Kingdom. Fast forward to 1965, the United Kingdom split the archipelago away from Mauritius, and formed its own British Indian Ocean territory. So they became one of the last outposts of the British Empire in November of 1965. They had previously been home to the Chagosians. The United Kingdom elected between 1967 and 1973 to expel them all. It literally picked people up from their ancestral homes and moved them to somewhere else. In order to enable the United States to build its naval support facility on Diego Garcia. Right, hands up who knew all this, especially if you're very cross about what Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage and the Daily Mail have told you about the Chagos Islands. Hands up if you knew all of this, especially the bit about just being lifted up from your home and dropped somewhere completely differently. So that culminated in 1973. The naval support facility operating under a special agreement. So it was between July and September of 1971 that the forced removal of Diego Garcia's population mostly took place. Okay, so then the sovereignty dispute kicks in because Mauritius reasonably has a long-standing claim to the territory that was there, well, technically theirs once, but French, I think it was Dutch for a while. And then you come to the question of how the UK was able to hang on to it. And the answer to that became clear in June of 2017, about a year after Britain voted to leave the European Union. So once again, Messrs Farage, Johnson, Rees-Mogg and the rest of them are somewhat relevant to our tale, to our twisting tale. Representatives from 193 nations assembled at the United Nations General Assembly to discuss a matter concerning the UK. Should the United Nations request an advisory opinion from its disputes court on the incendiary issue, wrote a journalist from Politico in November of last year, of one of Britain's final imperial treasures, the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean. In other words, was that 1967 separation of the islands from Mauritius as part of the decolonisation efforts lawful or unlawful? Had it breached international law by forcibly picking up people from their ancestral homes and dropping them somewhere else to make way for a US military base? Now, the Assembly's verdict was, spoiler alert, a resounding yes. And a lot of lawyers would say to you at this point, of course it was. So how had we got away for it so long? Well, previously, the European Union would have acted in alliance with its fellow member. In other words, by the time the vote came, when the speeches were over, 94 countries voted in favour of a referral to the ICJ. And just 14 voted with the United Kingdom against it. Out of the EU countries present, only Croatia and Hungary voted in accordance with us. Cyprus voted the other way, and all the other EU members abstained. And what's interesting about that is that would not have happened previously. The European Union, being a bloc, both political and trading, would have acted not necessarily as one, but certainly with a much greater sense of collective power. Who do you think was in charge of our diplomatic efforts at this point? Who do you think was charged with winning over former allies that we had just embarked upon a 2-year-long period of insulting? I'll tell you, who would have been the worst possible bloke to be charged with keeping everything sweet with our former fellow members of the European Union? Yeah, you're right. The bloke who compared Germans to concentration camp guards. So Boris Johnson, as Foreign Secretary, had the job, and it may have proved to be an impossible job, even in the hands of someone who isn't an absolute menace. His job was to keep things sweet. His diplomatic efforts were spearheaded by Boris Johnson, and they failed miserably. Philippe Sands was a legal advisor to Mauritius in the Chagos case, one of the country's leading lawyers, and he says Brexit dropped from the heavens, quite frankly. There is no question that, but for Brexit and Boris Johnson, the resolution would have had less chance of reaching the General Assembly or being adopted with such a large majority. A Foreign Office official, a former civil servant, speaking anonymously to Politico, said it was widely viewed at the time in the Foreign Office, that's Boris Johnson's Foreign Office, that all EU countries and their allies ordinarily vote down such a motion affecting another member state at the General Assembly. But post-Brexit, we lost that protection. So the UK did not benefit from the EU votes and those of its allies. And hence the wheels being set in motion to Chagos leaving today. In a way, this is the first element of Brexit leading to the UK losing territory. Yeah, but we've still got sovereignty. It showed how that initial grab for purported sovereignty, might actually lead to its diminution. And on it goes. David Hannay, a former ambassador to the United Nations, who now sits as a crossbench peer, also picks up on the pre- and post-Brexit positions. Before Britain left, he writes, Britain enjoyed pretty rock-solid support at the United Nations and a working assumption that the EU stands by its members' definition of their sovereignty and territorial integrity. You know what happens next. You could sense the power slipping away, recalled Philippe Sands. That last humiliating defeat at the UN when the General Assembly voted to accept the ICJ's opinion that the previously explained acts had been unlawful. Guess how many countries supported the UK and the US by then? The US, of course, have subsequently come out in support of what is going on. Guess how many countries were left on our side by then? 116 on the other side. Guess how many countries we were left with after Boris Johnson's diplomatic efforts? 4. 4 countries left batting alongside us and the United States, although the United States, of course, have subsequently endorsed the deal. And there it is. So you're left with the choice of either not complying with the ICJ's ruling or, and therefore, essentially exploding your rationale for being in it at all, the International Court of Justice, or abiding by its decision and doing what was done yesterday. So, roads lead back to Brexit, and responsibility lies in part with Boris Johnson. So what does Boris Johnson do? Starts attacking Keir Starmer. Sometimes when I do a misinformation, it's funny. Sometimes when I do a misinformation, it is illuminating and not necessarily that important. Sometimes when I do a misinformation, it is a crystal clear depiction of how completely corrupted right-wing media and right-wing politics in this country has become. Because how many people here have heard various Brexiters, buffoons, spivs and charlatans clutching their pearls and gnashing their teeth about the so-called Chagos Islands deal? How many commentators who would struggle to tie their own shoelaces but somehow felt qualified to tell you to vote for Brexit and to support Boris Johnson and to applaud Liz Truss's budget? How many of them have also been exhorting you recently to rage against the signing of the deal, that the Chagos arrangement is an appalling insult to the United Kingdom, a surrendering of sovereignty, some sort of surrender, a failure? Because if it is any of those things, and spoiler alert, it isn't, but if it were any of those things, it would have been a disaster caused in large part by Brexit and accelerated by Boris Johnson. And yet the people moaning and wailing and whining loudest about it are the people whose voices were also loudest, whose wails were also strongest, and whose whining was also endless during the run-up to the actual referendum vote. It is almost as if these people had no idea what they were talking about, what they were doing, or what the consequences would be. So much so that now a direct consequence of what they did in 2016 is something that they are attacking as being unacceptable and somehow the responsibility of, once again, the man charged with trying to undo some of the damage that has been done. And of course there was another alternative, which would be to defy the International Court of Justice, to become sort of de facto international outlaws, or to surrender our membership of it. That would have been the alternative. And that is the truth. Those are the facts. And this is
Missed information.
Thank you, Emily. The time is approaching 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is Friday. We have done an awful lot of serious stuff this week, and in the next hour we're going to do something rather less serious. I was toying with the idea of having a conversation about the strangest thing that you found in your garden, but Eleanor has talked me out of it on the perfectly reasonable grounds that when we did a quick whip around the office, nobody actually had a very funny answer to the question. But here's your missing word round for the final hour of the programme. Man in Norway wakes up to find huge blank in garden. Man in Norway wakes up to find huge blank in garden. That's your missing word round. It's not your Friday 12 o'clock topic. Well, not unless I change my mind during the news.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 12. Where are we on this? Man in Norway wakes to find huge what in garden? Can we do a little side order of what's the strangest thing you found in your garden, or would it not work? I found a man in my garden on Saturday, or rather on Sunday morning, but that's because I'd had a rather raucous party on Saturday night and he'd fallen asleep. About 3:30 in the morning, we searched the whole house for him. The wife was getting quite concerned. And then I thought, well, I'll just take a torch and go and have a little look around the garden. And there he was, snoring away, absolutely oblivious to everything going on around him. Yes, it was my Great Gatsby party. I don't know, because what we did in the break or in the production, so-called what passes for our production meeting before we come on air in the morning, I said, let's do this. Let's do what's the strangest thing you found in your garden. And Eleanor said, well, what is the strangest thing you found in your garden? And I had a little think about it, and I recognised that there's not really anything. So it's probably quite rare to find something really strange in your... A hot air balloon! A hot air balloon! I once found it, not quite in my garden. In my old house where I was growing up, there was a field behind the back garden. And I was lying in bed on a Sunday morning. I'd be about 14, 15 years old. And I had this really weird noise like this. I'll stop now. And I mean, it was Sunday morning. I was 14, so there's no way I'm getting out of bed to find out what it was. But I heard some people outside shouting excitedly, so I rolled out of my bunk bed, looked out the window. It's a blooming great hot air balloon about 40 yards from my bedroom window. How much is 40 yards? How far? From about here to... Can you... I mean, this might not work on the radio. From about here to the back of the classic, but no, the back of the Smooth studio, but that way, the back of the Smooth studio. From about here to the back of the Smooth studio in that direction. So is that about 40 yards, give or take? A blooming great hot air balloon, which was actually landing in the field behind my house, but it wasn't technically in my garden. So would that have qualified? If you'd said earlier, what's the strangest thing you found in your garden? And I'd said, especially waking up to find in your garden, although that narrows the opportunity slightly. And I said, a hot air balloon. Actually, Eleanor, would you have said, okay, that's quite a good topic then? Or would you still have been a bit negative? Well, anyway, we may do that. Shall I tell you what it is anyway? Shall I give away the answer to the question? This is absolutely hilarious. Man in Norway, and you're going to have to trust me on this one. Man in Norway wakes to find huge container ship in garden. And I don't just... I mean, you know what a container ship is. You've seen a container ship. They are not like little yachts or boats. They are absolutely immense. They're the size of small countries. And when I say in garden, you think I'm exaggerating. It is... If it had been 6 metres further south, it would have been in his bedroom. 6 metres further south, it would have been in his bedroom. And you can see the footage. And the footage is, for once, as a radio presenter, I often think the pictures are better on the radio. But for once, I think you need to look at these pictures. And you can find them at lbc.co.uk. We've got them up on the website. And it is truly extraordinary. Imagine waking up. I mean, a hot air balloon was pretty shocking, but that was 40 yards away. This is about 10 yards away from the side of his house. It's a miracle that they missed it. And when it says in his garden, and you'll think, oh, it's Norway, it's probably a fjord, it's probably got loads of space. It's not. It is. I reckon he could jump from his roof and hit the boat. He could jump off the boat and land on his roof, but the boat's much higher than his roof, so he wouldn't be able to jump in the opposite direction unless he was very good at parkour. So that is the answer to this week's missing word round. Man in Norway wakes to find huge container ship in garden. I am toying with the idea of allowing you to tell me what the strangest thing you have found. No, and I'm not going to accept. I actually had a package from Hermes in my garden, which is a miracle. No, it has to be something really, really funny, but it's not going to be our topic, because here is what the topic is going to be. Funnily enough, it ties in with how I opened the first hour of the programme, when I was talking to you about the importance of changing your mind and the difference between people who never do, Margaret Thatcher, who sort of boasted about never being capable of a U-turn or of changing her mind, and those of us who hope that we can change our mind when the facts or events or the evidence demands it. The areas in which I used to be a very boring, predictable phone-in radio host are, I don't think I was ever quite like that on immigration, which is the sort of holy grail of boring, predictable radio phone-in hosts. But on obesity, I was very much of the eat less, exercise more, stiff upper lip. And I saw the light on that for a number of reasons, not least because somebody said to me, would you speak about people whose eating disorders have made them terribly thin in the same way that you speak about people whose eating disorders have made them terribly large? And I said, no, of course. Oh, I see what you mean. So there was obesity on one level. What other things have we put on a long list of stuff that I've recognised I was wrong about? That was probably the biggest. Also, the whole thing about resilience, which is not a dirty word any longer, but can become one when people start talking about, oh yeah, that was it, special educational needs. I used to be one of those idiots who said, we just called it naughty in my day. ADHD, OCD, WDBD, BBC, what a load of old nonsense. We just called it naughty in my day, or lazy. You're naughty, you're lazy, you haven't got a special condition, you don't. So there's still a lot of that about. I used to be one of those idiots. I used to have a big problem with tattoos. I know that sounds a little bit trivial in the great scheme of things, but I used to say things like, I wouldn't want my child to be taught by someone with tattoos. Again, in that category, I was an idiot. Any other examples of me being an idiot? Why don't we turn this into a free-for-all? Any examples of me? So there was another one. Pets. Always been cat owners in my family. But cats are a curiously independent creature. Usually, not always, I grant you. I used to be incredibly rude about people who loved their dogs excessively. And who the hell was I to use the word excessively? There may well be circumstances in which the word excessively applies, and we're about to explore them. But I used to very much adopt the line that if you died on your sofa, your dog would eat you. People would tell me that their dog was like a child. I mean, we heard some terrible stories, up to and including people that would say to a grieving friend, someone who had lost a child, when they lost their dog, they might say something like, oh, now I know how you feel when you lost your daughter, because I've just buried Rover. I've just buried Spot. I know at least two people in my real life to whom that has happened, when someone has actually lost a partner or a child and been told by a friend, a well-meaning friend, and that's the point I think I would have missed in my idiot years. A well-meaning friend who thought they were offering sympathy loses a dog and says, now I know how you felt when you lost your husband, or now I know how you felt when you lost your daughter. And that is a really helpful illustration of the story in the news today about dogs increasingly being seen as child surrogates. I think this might have an interesting generational dimension to it as well. I was with, and let me just remember whether this happened on tape or not. Yes, so I was with the incredibly wonderful Jamila Jamil yesterday. I don't know how familiar you are with her work, but don't worry if you're not, because there's a superb episode of Full Disclosure on the way. And she said that she, home is where the heart is, but she said, no, wherever my dogs are. And then there was a little pause and she said, and my boyfriend. And so the idea that some people hold their dogs to themselves so closely that they become surrogate children, that's the phrase that appears in the news today, child surrogates, dogs increasingly being seen as child surrogates. But crucially, it's by owners who have a pet or choose to have a pet over a baby. This research today even suggests that it may be contributing to the declining birth rate. I was speaking to a colleague in her 20s, oddly enough, about the conversation we had in the last hour. All right, Come on, this is pretty special, right? Today on the programme, we've talked about the winter fuel allowance, the growing gulf between people whose parents can afford to help them buy property and people who can't, and dogs becoming surrogate children, and I've tied all three together. So I've already made the ability to change your mind relevant to the conversation about Keir Starmer's U-turn and my attitude to dogs. And now my 20-something colleague ties together the conversation about property because she talks about expectations and says, I dream of having a dog. She actually said to me, I think I once would have dreamed of having a child, but that feels so far out of reach financially. A bit like property ownership does for growing members of her generation. It feels so far out of reach that when I think about my future and what, quote, success or, quote, security might look like, it will be when I've got my own little dog. I've got my own little dog. So when I was her age, I was thinking I'm going to be a dad one day, and she's thinking I'm going to be a dog owner one day. None of this is written in stone. Everyone can change. But that is why the phenomenon that we are examining next could be contributing to the decline in the birth rate in Western countries. Academics have said that while owners long considered their dogs to be family members, an increasing number of owners have begun to regard their dogs as their children. So there's always, with my years of idiocy, there's always a vestige, isn't there? There's always a remnant. There's always a little bit of the idiot left inside me. And that idiot is now shouting, this is ridiculous. This is outrageous. This is pathetic. And I'm telling the idiot inside me to shut up. Shut up, you idiot, I'm saying. But I can't quite silence him. Until I ask the question of what's wrong with this? What's wrong with treating your dog like a child? That's question number one. 0345 60 60 973. What's wrong with it? Seriously. The point at which I realised what an idiot I was. Does anyone remember? How much attention have you been paying? If you've read my second book, How Not to Be Wrong, you should know this, actually. I think it's the final few lines of the book, if memory serves. We're talking on air, and I was indulging my inner idiot, and I was ranting about how, I don't know why you love your dog so much, it'd eat you if it got half the chance, which is true for the record, but not relevant to the conversation we're having today. I don't know what you do. Why you love your dog? How can your dog be your daughter? Don't be so stupid. What do you mean you love your dog like I love my children? That's just obnoxious, absurd, quite offensive, actually. And I was doing the full gamut, you've probably heard other radio presenters who've never managed to keep their inner idiot quiet. I got an email of an old chap who'd lost his wife recently. And he sent me an email, and it was so nice. If someone's ever ranting away, or someone's ever being furious for silly reasons, one of the best ways to diffuse them, I suspect, is kindness and politeness, because it makes you feel ridiculous. If you're spitting nails and someone just comes along and goes, oh, hello, I wonder if you mind listening to this for a moment. Immediately you feel a little bit ridiculous because somebody calm and sweet is in front of you and you're behaving like a pig-headed buffoon. And he sent me this lovely little email. Didn't even pick me up on what I'd been saying. So there was none of the, James, I really object, or none of just that. So it was, Dear James, I wish I'd kept it. Dear James, when I lost my wife 6 months ago, he wrote, I think he named her. Dear James, I lost my wife Diane 6 months ago. And he wrote, and if it wasn't for our dachshunds, I don't think I would have made it. And I swear to you that in that moment, in that nanosecond, my inner idiot shrank to the size of a thumbnail. I don't know that you can ever get rid of him altogether, but on this subject, in that nanosecond, he shrank to the size of a thumbnail. Because how am I going to turn around to a grieving widower and say, oh, I can't believe how much you love your dogs. That's pathetic, that is. That's absolutely ridiculous. I lost my wife Diane 6 months ago, and if it wasn't for our dachshunds, I don't think I'd have got through it. I don't think I'd have made it. I don't think I'd be here today. And what on earth is wrong with that love, with that level of love, with that investment of love? I can think of some answers to that question. Do you think your mum loves her dog more than she loves you? 0345 6060973. Genuine question. Are you prepared to admit to me that you love your dog more than you love your children? 0345 6060973. But for the rest of us, I mean, we can have a little bit of fun with the way in which you treat your dog that might, in a previous age, have been reserved for the way parents treat their children. Who indulges their dog the most? 0345 6060973. And what's wrong with it? What's wrong with treating your dog like a surrogate child? Genuine question. And I'm not being glib. I would actually quite like some answers. But it's real me asking this question. It's not my inner idiot. Is there something dangerous, damaging, dodgy about loving your dog in the way that parents love their children? Because, you know, those two examples I gave you of somebody saying to a grieving human or a human grieving a human, I've just lost my dog, so I know how you feel. That feels wrong, right? That feels obnoxious and offensive, albeit well-meaning. So there must be something wrong with this position. But at the moment, I can't pinpoint precisely what it is. So there's three elements to this conversation. There's the parent who loves their dog more than their children. I'd like to speak to either side of that pretty unpleasant position. 0345 6060973. There is the owner who recognises that their dog is a surrogate child. How do you know? What's the difference between your relationship with your dog and a more normal relationship? Or what do you do for your dog that most people would think was a bit odd or a little bit over the top or overindulgent? And then there is the potentially most interesting question, but not the most amusing. What's actually wrong with it? If it fulfills a nurturing drive that's similar to parenting, but without the demands that raising offspring can bring, what's wrong with this? Take your pick. You can answer all or any of those on 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 12, already a bit poignant from Paul. Morning, James. Re dogs. I can tell you for a fact that my stepmother loves her dog more than she loves me because she absolutely hates my guts. Crikey. It's a lot coming in on this. I'm not going to be able to keep up to date with all of it, but there was a lovely message from a dog groomer a moment ago. The problem is sometimes when my inbox goes bonkers, I can't actually find the ones that I saw a nanosecond ago because so many more. Here it is. Well done, Hannah. As a dog groomer, I see this all the time. I'd say that younger couples or women whose children have grown up and left home are probably the worst offenders. The problem is the negative effect it can have on the dogs. Most of them suffer from anxiety and other behavioural problems because they are raised like babies rather than dogs. And there it is. I've been asking all of the questions based upon the human perspective, when, of course, I should have been thinking about how this affects the dogs. So if there are any dogs listening who can tell me what it's like to... I mean, do you want to be treated like a baby? Do you want to be treated like a child? How do you feel being a surrogate infant? Get on the Dog and Bone and give me a call. On 1222 is the time. 0345 6060973 is the number. Sharon is in Margate. Sharon, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
So I knew from the age of about 25 that I never ever wanted children, and I was desperate to have a cat or a dog. And when I met my husband in my mid-30s, the first thing I did was get a cat, and then after two or 3 years, got my first pug, and then got a second pug, and it's absolutely the best decision. I love them more than anything in the world. More than my husband, even.
Does he know that? Wow, you see, you laughed then, which is an attempt to cover up what you just said, but I can tell, because I've got antennae, that you meant it.
Yeah, I love them. They're my absolute world. I love them so much. Right. They sleep with me, everything. They're my world.
I'm going to play a slightly unpleasant psychological game with you.
Uh-huh.
There's a fire.
Okay.
And your husband has knocked himself unconscious trying to rescue the dogs.
Yes.
Who are you going to save, the dogs or the husband? I think you've answered the question, Sharon.
Can I abstain from answering that?
I think you've answered the question.
I'm sorry. I take them all.
Yeah, you can't. You're not capable. This is very much a binary choice. And there it is. And I mean, you're not perhaps the person to answer this question, but what's wrong with it? So what?
Nothing.
Why shouldn't you?
Nothing. And actually, my close friends that I know totally appreciate that, because most of my friends have children. I think the only disadvantage from not having children and having dogs instead is that when I'm 50 now, and I've missed out kind of socially sometimes because I don't have children, so I can't. I miss out a little bit in that way.
You're coming out the other end of that at 50, but for a long period, it is a lot of socialising is contingent upon the children.
Around children.
Isn't it? Yes, exactly.
So I did miss it, but I have an Instagram account, and I've met lots of people through that community, and I've met them. I've gone to America to meet people I've met through it, and met their
fellow pug fanciers.
Yeah, with pugs, people that have pugs all over the place.
And what I mean, could an outsider clock the fact that these dogs are surrogate children, that you indulge these dogs in ways that other dog owners do not? Is it immediately obvious? Is it evident, or is it just going on internally, psychologically?
No, I think anyone. I mean, like, I have a stroller for them. My number plate is
like a pushchair
related. Yeah, I've got a stroller.
What?
I only if it's extremely hot and it's too far for them to walk. I wouldn't generally walk around with a stroller for them, but lots of people do. If the weather's really hot or they can't walk, and it's a. And
what do they eat?
What do they eat?
Yeah.
So I buy. I won't tell you the food, but say the brand of the food. So I buy a food that comes once a month, and you put it in the freezer. It's like a human grade food. It's a really good quality food, and then they have fresh chicken as well.
Fresh chicken, that's nice.
Yeah.
And final question. Final question. What is the best present you've ever bought them?
Oh, I had a bespoke harness made. I bought them. Can I say Gucci? I bought them Gucci harnesses.
How much?
£350 each.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I mean it. This is slightly annoying. It might be better radio if my inner idiot could actually fight his way to the surface and start mocking you, but I can't, Sharon. So, I mean, this is lovely.
I'm perfectly intelligent.
You don't have to.
Job.
Well, you do listen to this programme, so some people might need a little bit of persuading on that front. But no, this is just something in you. I don't want children, but I want. Yeah. And you do you recognise the word surrogate? I mean, do you feel that you are feeding something in yourself when you feed so much love to the dogs?
Yeah, I do. I mean, because I worry about them in the same way people worry about their children. I feel physically sick sometimes if one of my dogs gets poorly.
Yeah.
So I definitely do think but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. That's the thing. There is nothing wrong with it.
I don't think there is either at the moment, but it's only 12:27 and the afternoon is young. So and I don't want anybody to be rude necessarily to Sharon and people like her, but if there is something wrong with this, the dog groomer's point about the dogs perhaps being a little anxious because you can do that to children though. It's helicopter parenting. We're going to get Daily Mail articles soon about how modern dogs aren't resilient enough and they need to toughen up. We're wrapping our dogs in cotton wool. In my day, we're going to get articles like that, I bet, in direct response to this research, which incidentally is proper academic. It was published in the European Psychologist. The paper was published in the journal European Psychologist, and it's researchers from the Department of Ethology at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. Sharon, thank you. Perfect start. Beth's in Norwich. Beth, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. Thanks
Hello.
for having me. First time caller, long time listener.
Welcome.
I got my dog 4 years ago. And within that time, I used to work for the NHS when I first got her. But unfortunately, I didn't feel I could give a proper work-life balance towards her. I've got a health condition as well. So I just was feeling quite drained by the end of the day. And I thought, actually, my love for dogs goes beyond my own dogs. I've actually set up my own dog walking and dog training company.
So you gave up the day job to become a full-time dog person?
Pretty much, yeah. Okay. And I could definitely say my mental health and physical health has definitely become a lot better for it.
I don't find that difficult to believe at all. I'm going to play the. So if you're walking my dog, and she's at the vet's at the moment as well. So I'm just going to tug on your heartstrings a little bit there. If you were walking my dog and your dog was there as well, my dog wouldn't stand a chance if there was any trouble on the horizon, would she?
So I actually walk dogs in a private dog field.
Yeah, but there still might be an elephant. There might be a lion. A lion could jump over the fence easily. A container ship could come careering up the garden, says Keith, quite rightly. You never know when a container ship's going to appear. They're like the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects container. So, but you wouldn't save my dog. If it was a choice between your dog and my dog, you wouldn't save my dog, would you?
But in a safe, secure environment, I wouldn't have to come to that decision. And also, I don't tend to take my own dog on my group walks.
Do you not?
For that reason. No, just because I want to be able to, focus my attention on other people's dogs, and then I can.
You sound
come
like
back
a great
to
dog
mine
walker.
afterwards.
What is the
I try my
difference?
best.
What is the difference, Beth, between what we might describe traditional dog ownership and child surrogacy?
So I believe dog ownership has changed for the better. I think people are treating their dogs with more kindness, and I think it should always have been that way. And I do think a lot of people, like myself, do treat their dogs like their children, because I'm a 29-year-old. I don't see children in my lifetime just because of health conditions and things like that. I've got a lot of love to give, and I think that they can provide that for people as well.
I'm not going to wish that my inner idiot was still in the ascendancy, but it is very hard to work out what it is that people get so upset about or so offended about when other people choose to bestow so much love upon a dog. I mean, the headline, everything about it sounds funny and sounds like something you can tease somebody for. But when you actually speak to these people, like Beth and our previous caller, you can't really find the entry point. It's why you'd have to go a little bit performative. You'd have to do the whole, and I'm sure I did this, you'd have to do the whole, that line I would use was, that if you died, if you died on your sofa, it would have eaten your arm by the end of EastEnders, that kind of stuff. When you're kind of being not quite real, not quite sincere, you kind of half mean it, but you're embarrassed by your own feelings. I don't know. I wouldn't have thought, if love was a currency, I would not have thought that a pound of love spent on a dog was worth the same as a pound of love spent on a child. That's just me. But as I mentioned, our little dog is at the vet's at the moment. And when the vets rang this morning, our first reaction was, "Oh my God, is everything all right?" And everything was fine. I might change my view when I get the bill, but I suspect that will be one of the things that Mrs. O'Brien diplomatically decides to keep from me. Tim Humphreys here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. On an altogether more serious note, and not dissimilar in a sense to the Chagos Islands story, the UK media once again absolutely disgracing itself in coverage of Donald Trump's lies about so-called white genocide in South Africa. I've got some details for you on that I will try to share before 1 o'clock. But imagine if the footage that Donald Trump showed to the South African president, claiming that it evidenced white genocide and contained footage of graves, imagine if it was actually your own mum and dad who were the focus of that footage. And you recognised when you woke up in the morning, because you lived on the other side of the world, you lived in Australia, you woke up, watched the news and saw Donald Trump hijacking, misrepresenting and lying about your own parents' death in order to make racist propaganda designed to embarrass a South African president. That is exactly what happened to Nathan Rafferty, who has spoken to one newspaper. Even as another British newspaper decides to quote a South African businessman describing the BBC as leftist and woke for daring to fact-check Donald Trump's ludicrous claims. The Daily Telegraph give this character a right old showing in today's newspaper, despite the fact that pretty much every news organisation on the planet has concluded that Donald Trump was once again talking through the top of his bright orange bonds. But we're having a bit of fun at the moment. Love is love, says Sarah, which sounds like a song lyric. But she's right. And I want you to think about this. What's wrong with treating your dog like a child? Unless you've got a child that you treat like a dog. I think that's an element of the conversation that can't be completely overlooked. But what is wrong with treating your dog like a child? I once would have railed at this for reasons that I can't really articulate, just that it would have... I don't know why I would have railed about this. But what is wrong with it? Is it envy? Because love is love, as Sarah says. And if you're not feeling enough love... But I've always had lots of love in my life, so it wouldn't have been envy. I wouldn't have been thinking, gosh, I wish someone loved me as much as that person loves their dog, because someone does. For good or for ill. So why? Why is it a problem? Well, I mean, this character who's asked me not to read his name has a go at it, and a reasonable go. The problem, James, is that people use dogs as a personality replacement. They become boring people to be around. They're always talking about their dog, always chatting irrelevant rubbish about what their dog has done. Mate, you sound like you don't know any parents. Don't you? I mean, I am one, so I'm allowed to say this. That could be parents. Just swap the word dog for child, and we all become absolutely smitten and dull in the eyes of our childless friends. What the dog has done, where the dog's going, what the dog's doing. All that said, I do have an exciting weekend ahead because my in-laws are bringing the dog over. 12:37 is the time. Joanne is in Birstall, near Batley. Joanne, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Well, I'm 53. And
so am I. It's a bloody miracle.
No, but my best mate has always rescued Springer Spaniels.
Where from?
Batley.
But where does she rescue them from? What's happening in Batley that puts so many Springer Spaniels in peril?
I don't know, but she rescues them from whatever around the country. But she is so absolutely obsessed. She hates kids, by the way. Oh. She would never have a child, and she's done this for the last 40 years, right?
Yeah.
Now, I had kids when I was 25. I had twin girls and a boy at 25, 26-year-old. And we had a really crazy conversation one day. I've had more budgies than cats, and I've had more cats than dogs, but I have had 4 dogs in my life.
Okay, hang on. There's a riddle there. You've had more budgies than cats, and you've had more cats than dogs. So you've had about 8 cats and 24 budgies?
I've had 24 budgies, 8 cats, and 4 dogs.
Carry on.
Yeah.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Yes. And what happened, we had a really ridiculous conversation one day when my oldest were about 6-year-old.
Yeah.
She was just crying how much she loved her dogs.
Oh.
Crying.
Yeah.
Because she saved them from, they were working dogs,
This is your friend, so it's not crying for any reason. She's having an outpouring of uncontrollable love.
Yes.
Towards her rescued Springer Spaniels.
Yeah. To this day, her daily Facebook is, I love my dogs, they're my babies. Right?
Yes.
But let's rewind about 20 years ago, and we had a conversation, and I just said, look, and you got a bit emotional, and I just said, right, because she lived by the sea, and I just said, if I brought my child to the sea and he ended up drowning, and your dog was drowning, who would you say first? Yeah. And she says, my dog. Yeah, and I got extremely offended.
I bet you did.
Yeah, and I was very upset. And the relationship, we've got it back together, but she's 100% her dogs. 100%, right?
Right, you'd struggle to stay friends. Well, I mean, I suppose you'd reassure yourself with the thought that scenario is never going to arise. But some idea, you wouldn't let her babysit, would you?
No. She just doesn't like kids. She's great around my kids.
Sure.
But she needs to walk away 2 hours later. I've done enough cuddling and going.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
But what happened then, right, one of my twins, sorry, this is getting a little bit dark. So one of my twins got abused at 11-year-old, and she was 6 years in hospital.
Right.
And she says to me, when she came out of hospital, she says, Mum, I want a staffy.
Right.
I want a staffy. I said, I'm going to buy you a puppy. I'm going to buy you a puppy. And she says, Mum, I really want a staffy. Now, I've had 4 dogs in my life.
To protect her, was it partly?
No, just
that's the breed she fancied.
Just for the mother.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah.
She was 22-year-old when she came out of hospital.
Okay.
After 6 years.
Oh God.
And she just, I just want to mother something, but Mum, I really want a staffy. Right. And I'm like, I'm buying you a staffy when you get out of hospital. So that's what I did. But the dog that I got previous to her was 20 years ago, and I actually bought it from a pet shop window.
Okay. How much was it?
So, oh gosh, about £100.
Okay.
£100. But this was 15 years ago. when pet shops could have dogs in the window.
Yeah, of course.
You know? And anyway, we had her for 15 years, beautiful dog. But so now I'm in the new realm of internet, looking at the internet, buying a dog, buying a staffy.
Right.
So this person advertised a staffy, going to be born in like 2 months, and I put my interest in, bought the staffy, picked her up at 9 weeks old. My daughter had been out of hospital, bear in mind she'd been there 6 years.
Yes.
She'd been out of hospital 4 weeks. And I'm like, I was so giddy to get this dog.
Of course.
And it turned out, it just exponentially grew, and it turned out to be an XL bully.
Oh, Lord. So it's huge.
Yeah. And she's beautiful, don't get me wrong. But the 6 months that she knew that dog was coming, while she was in hospital, she did all the training online. And when she got the dog, she trained that dog instantly, forever. She's 4 years old now, and she's trained every day. And we've had 2 trainers in between to show us the way. But
so you've done everything right,
we've done absolutely everything right. She's exempted. But then what happened was, she came out, and I got her a house because she's a twin. So I got her a house with her twin to rent.
That was the last hour.
Sorry?
That was the last hour. Parents buying houses for their children.
No. Yeah, I listened to all that also. I had something to say about that.
I didn't think anyone was going to go. I didn't think anyone was going to go bi topical on this one. So you got your kids a house because they needed room for the dog.
No.
You got the dog a house.
No. It was paid for. Obviously, she was getting like a housing benefit.
Right.
She come out of hospital, so it wasn't like the parents doing that
Oh,
thing.
I see. But so she moved into her own place.
Yeah, and then. Obviously, the dog was exponentially growing. We realised what it was. And obviously, we've gone through the exemption and everything like that. She's a beautiful girl. Now, what happened was the rental place sold the house, and she had to move into a different house with no garden. And I took the dog, and I've had the dog 2 years now.
Right.
So, based on an XL bully...
Are we heading towards, because I'm conscious of Sheila Fogarty's show starting shortly.
Okay.
Are we heading towards you coming to a better understanding of your friend's relationship with her Springer Spaniels? Or not?
No.
Oh, all right, carry on.
No, this is what I'm getting to. Because of protection, I've got to put on to that XL bully because everyone hates XL bullies.
Yes.
I love her so much.
Oh.
Yeah. And I actually take her to bed now because I love her so much, and I'm thinking one day someone's going to say something to you or say something and get the council involved, and police are going to turn up at my house, like next door neighbours or anything like that. And it's like, she's exempt, she's beautiful, she's trained, she's a beautiful dog, she loves dogs. You know, so there's no harm in her.
I think. Well, you mean if the dog does something wrong, you might get into bother. I don't think they can
No. XL bully owners, really good XL bully owners, have got an anxiety. They live it day in, day out.
If your friend's child and your dog were drowning, which one would you rescue?
Me, personally, her dog and my child.
You've got to choose one. It's your dog or her child. It's not the same friend as before. It's a new friend with a baby.
Oh, right, I get what you're saying. Right, if she had a child, I would save the child.
Oh, there you go then.
I would be broken. I would be absolutely broken. I would save, to be honest, I would be Wonder Woman. I would save them both.
Oh, you know what? I believe you. I can see you coming out of the waves like Ursula Andress in Dr. No with a XL bully under one arm and a baby under the other.
That is me.
I think I feel a painting coming on, Joanne.
Brilliant.
Thank you for that. Do you know what that was? That was a Shaggy Dog story.
Yes, it probably was.
But we got there in the end. God bless.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I want to do this because I think it's important. And I realise now, despite having come off Twitter, I'm on Blue Sky if you're interested, at Mr. James OB, that the one of the main reasons why the world is going to hell in a handcart is because absolutely absurd and obscene far-right online propaganda since Elon Musk bought Twitter has moved at full speed into the mainstream. And there was a wonderful example in the Oval Office the other day. So should we do this as a misinformation? I think this is probably... Well, why not anyway? Because we went to all the trouble of commissioning Emily Maitlis to record a sting.
Missed information.
Thank you, Emily. The BBC has been accused of downplaying the killings of white farmers in South Africa in its reporting, says the Daily Telegraph today. Brackets, by one bloke, close bracket. Turn instead to the testimony of a man called Nathan Rafferty, whose parents were murdered in South Africa in 2020 and whose parents feature, or memorials to whose parents feature, in footage that Donald Trump showed in the Oval Office the other day during the visit of the South African president, President Ramaphosa. And he lives in Australia now, and he woke up to see this story on the news, and he realised that not only was Donald Trump claiming that the video somehow provided evidence of white genocide, but he was also claiming that the crosses that were visible in the video were graves. These are burial sites, President Trump told President Ramaphosa. Burial sites, over 1,000 of white farmers. I want you to stop for a minute. That's what the President of the United States of America said to the President of South Africa about something that's happened in South Africa in the actual Oval Office in front of the world's media. The Daily Telegraph, I don't even know who edits it these days, has elected to run a story quoting one South African businessman claiming that the BBC, by dint of having done some fact-checking, has a leftist agenda and is woke in its coverage of the issue. So let's go to the son of the dead farmers who were being commemorated in the footage that Donald Trump showed. Because he woke up in Australia the other morning and realised that his parents, who were shot multiple times by intruders on their farm in 2020, had featured in the footage. The crosses did not mark graves. They were part of a poignant protest in 2020 about rural crime, and the crosses commemorate people of all colours, creeds and ethnicities. This is, even by the standards of Donald Trump, this is almost unbelievable. Nathan Rafferty, who's 36, told The Times, as soon as you say it shows grave sites, then people can easily say the rest is nonsense. It was a memorial to all victims of rural crime of all colours. Exaggeration makes genuine concerns about safety easy to discredit. So it's probably down to Elon Musk, who shared this video on Twitter in March and again in May with claims that the crosses represented white farmers. They don't. In the event of a farm being robbed and including murder, farm workers, black farm workers, are likely to die in greater numbers than white owners because these crimes are undertaken for theft and robbery. So you kill everybody. The idea that they're motivated. Incredible that you can use the word genocide completely inaccurately in the context of crime in South Africa, but you're not allowed to use it in the context of tens of thousands of Palestinians being killed in Gaza. Isn't that extraordinary, the world that we currently inhabit? But don't take my word for it. Speak to the son of the couple whose murders were being commemorated in the footage that Donald Trump claimed A, showed graves, B, showed thousands of victims of white genocide, and C, commemorated an exclusively white population. Lie, lie, lie. So what does the Daily Telegraph do? The BBC has been accused of downplaying the killings of white farmers in South Africa in its reporting. What the Daily Telegraph doesn't mention is that the footage that they use, the footage that they cite, does absolutely none of the things that Donald Trump claims that it does. Don't take my word for it. Speak to the son of the couple who were murdered and commemorated in the footage that we're talking about. That is one of the single worst examples of journalism I have ever seen in a British newspaper. It's absolutely extraordinary, and I don't know why they're doing it. But that is what they have done. They've quoted a, quotes, influential South African businessman called Robert Hersov, criticising the broadcaster as leftist and woke because it fact-checked Donald Trump's completely false claims. That's the British media in 2025. Donald Trump lifts wholesale racist far-right lies from the middle of Twitter and plonks them on live international television in the middle of the Oval Office, and in so doing, he both maligns the memory and completely misrepresents a murdered couple. He offends their surviving son. He lies about what the footage contains, and the Daily Telegraph see it as an opportunity to attack the BBC. Also something Gary Lineker. That's where we are. And that's why I get so cross sometimes about what has happened not only to my profession and my country, but also to my late father's old newspaper. Forgive that moment of indulgence, but I think you would agree it's a fairly sterling example of...
Missed information.
Oh, poor old Penny in Aylesbury's got to come on now and talk to me about her dog. Penny, what would you like to say?
I'd first of all like to say that your message you got about how somebody felt that when their partner died,
yes.
They couldn't go on, really got to me because I felt like that when my husband died very suddenly. My son came home for a few weeks and went back to university because what I wanted, yes. And I had 2 beautiful Labradors. And I'll tell you, James, I don't think I wanted to get out of bed otherwise, and they kept me going. So that's an aside.
It's not an aside. It's an addition to what you're about to tell me, because it's a hugely important contribution to this conversation.
Thank you. But when my husband was alive, sadly, our youngest son died, and from that we got into doing Take a Break for Special Needs Children.
Oh, wow.
We were approved by social services, who were very keen for us to have the dogs around.
Oh.
But my husband always said he knew how to train dogs. They're part of the family, but you always have to be aware when children are around, particularly, that you're in charge and you mustn't leave them on their own or whatever. And I used to have a Downs child who he really wanted to keep pulling tails, and dogs don't like that. So we had to keep an eye all the time. We never had a problem, and they absolutely loved the children. And my son grew up for 7 years doing that.
So you recognise how much you can love a dog while also recognising you probably shouldn't treat it like a child.
I don't now. My 2 lovely Labradors died over the last couple of years, and I can't be without a dog, James.
No.
So I have a very, let's say, challenged Labrador Retriever, and I've had out of rescue because I couldn't afford a puppy. And that was a different ball game, but I'm pleased to say after 10 months he's becoming himself.
Oh, that's lovely.
He'd never been socialised, he'd never done anything, and it was hard work. I nearly sent him back a couple of times, but we've absolutely fallen for him.
You can't do that with a baby.
No, and I'm sorry, if I was choosing between a child and an adult and a dog, I would be devastated to lose my dog, but I'd go for the adult.
You'd have to, wouldn't you?
Well, you would, if that'd be daft, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, we say daft. That's a nice, kind word, daft. But yes,
daft.
Of course it would be daft, but that's where some people have ended up. I don't think it'd be, you'd be worried if it was your own child. I can just about get my head around someone who might save their dog over someone else's child or over a stranger's child. I know neither you nor I would.
Well, I had strangers' children in my house.
Of course you do, yes, of course.
And I was responsible for them. So as an adult, you are responsible over and above, aren't you?
Yes, you are. I bet you're very good at it.
So I'm told.
I bet you
and
are.
I like a well-behaved, happy dog who's got masses of toys.
Yes.
You might say he's spoilt for that, but it keeps him occupied because they actually have to be...
Not really. I don't think he's spoiled. I'm getting messages off people whose dogs only eat Marks and Spencer's food, Penny, so I don't think anyone's going to accuse you of spoiling the dog because he's got a few toys. I tell you what you have done. You've made me forget about full disclosure. God forbid, perish the thought. What an awful moment. CHRISTIANE AMANPOUR, who you've heard promoting her own podcast. This is how the world works now, isn't it, Sheila? So she's now on my podcast promoting her new podcast, which she's doing with her, probably the coolest accent we've heard on LBC since Anthony Scaramucci was here, with her ex-husband Jamie Rubin. But she spoke to, you can hear what she spoke to me about.
Another way people are trying to decipher Trump is it about spheres of influence? Yeah. Is this where we're going to end up with? I was just speaking to a friend of mine who's very, very plugged in at the UN and has perfect pedigree at the United Nations. This year, I believe in September, is the 80th anniversary, right? And there are real doubts about whether the United Nations can survive, at least in this current format. And what will that mean? And at the same time, people are, and funding is at a critical level. I mean, they're out of funding right now. Some countries haven't paid their dues. Maybe they will, but they're very, very bad right now. Some people believe that Donald Trump is one of these, late 19th century spheres of influence, early 20th century spheres of influence kind of guys, and that he is happy to let, eventually, once he's clobbered them over the head a bit, Xi take Asia Pacific. Putin take what we might as well call Eurasia, if
Yeah.
Putin takes it, Europe, Asia, Russia, etc. Not sure what happens to, Southeast Asia, India, and etc. And the United States takes the West and hunkers down behind all the West. This West doesn't necessarily include Europe. And that, I think, is scary. I do. Because whatever the problems with Europe, and of course we in the UK know that there was a whole referendum fought on this, it is still a project that was designed to guarantee peace on the continent, that has 500 million inhabitants, that is a huge voting bloc, that has so much power and ability, and to crash Europe again, I think will be very, very problematic.
That is Christiane Amanpour, one of the great foreign correspondents of our time, and little old me chewing the fat, really. It's a slightly different episode of Full Disclosure, where we are just talking about current affairs, events, most obviously the United States, but also far beyond. Partly because Christiane's been on Full Disclosure before when we did the whole Life and Times thing. So this one is highly recommended. But as I say, a bit of a departure from the normal territory. There are a few more crackers in the pipeline as well, but I'll wait to tell you more about them next week, starting Tuesday, because I'm taking bank holiday off. If you missed any of today's show, which would you agree with me, it's the funniest show that we've done in quite a long time, sometimes even intentionally. You can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on the top stories and opinions and put your news categories in the order you want, not to mention pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.